running a little bit behind. We're going to be starting cardiovascular training tonight. The last muscle we had really looked at was the tensor fascia. It came after the gluteus maximus, so I want to go back and just review a couple of things because, as we said, what are our two major anti-gravity muscles? Two major anti-gravity muscles.
Anti-gravity?
Immediately you spit them out. Quads and glutes.
Thank you.
Quads and
I hope
glutes.
I still have them on here.
And as I said before, you're going to find, particularly when working with a lot of older people, this is extremely important to work this muscle. Because you'll see that as people get older, typically with deconditioning of the quads and the glutes, they have more problems, getting in and out of chairs. So one of the best exercises you can do is certainly that of a squat, which we had talked about. And remember, with older people, it does not have to be a full squat. You may have people even holding on to something like a chair initially and just doing partial squats. Eventually getting to the point where they can go down further. Maybe after a while get to the point where they no longer are holding on with both hands, they're holding on with one. Then it's just their finger on there, and after a while they are able to, do a squat on their own. All you need to tell people is to think about the concept of keep the back straight and sit down. Keep the back straight and sit down. And as I think we said the other night, you might have people just do that where they're, like one of the nice things, you use benches you have in a gym. You can sort of stand at the end of the bench, or in the beginning even maybe straddle the bench. So people are comfortable because they know that if somehow they lose it, the bench is still there. But that person's just looking straight ahead, keeping the back straight, and sitting down, and sitting down. After a while, you get to the point where you have them just stop a hair short of actually touching the chair. So the ability to get people to do squats is extremely important. Now remember, if I am going down in a squat, descending, we're working glutes and we're working quads. And how are they working as I am descending? And without giving it a thought, you yell out in unison. Eccentrically. Remember, negatively, you're giving in to the pull of gravity. As we said, anytime you overcome gravity, and you are raising your body against gravity, or you're lifting a barbell against gravity, or you're working with a weight stack and you see that weight stack going up against gravity, you know all the muscles that are working have to be working how?
Positively or concentrically?
Concentrically, positively. And when I'm giving into gravity, they're working eccentrically.
Can we do it, just so you make sure you can visualize this, let's use the squat, because we might see this again very soon.
So she stands out there.
I'm not going to get in front of that light though.
If you were descending during a squat, what muscles are working in the hip joint and the knee joint, and how are they working? You're descending during a squat. What muscles are working in the hip joint and the knee joint, and how are they working?
Because you guys remember, I'm giving into gravity, so my muscles are stretching. I'm not contracting.
You're going to get questions like that.
Negatively or eccentrically. Can you see this?
What muscles are working in a given joint area, and how are they working? When we say how are they working, there are only three choices. They're either working concentrically, positively, eccentrically, negatively, or statically. Statically. Those are the only three kinds of muscle contractions you can have. So what's working in the hip joint and knee joint, and how are they working when you are descending during a squat?
So when he says descend, if it's your second language, when you're going down in a squat, keep it simple. I'm going down, so I'm giving into gravity because gravity's pulling me down, see? Okay, so what muscles are working and how are they working, okay, when I'm going down into a squat?
And what would your answer be?
Eccentrically.
You know you're working eccentrically, but what muscles work in the hip joint and the knee joint?
Quads and glutes.
Quads and glutes. When you think about it, if you're coming up from a squat, you're overcoming gravity. You're working concentrically as you're coming up from the squat.
Because concentrically or
What
positively.
kind of movement do you have to get of the hip joint and knee joint to overcome the resistance? I'm down here and I'm overcoming the resistance. What kind of movement am I getting from the knee joint? Extension. What kind of movement am I getting in the hip joint? Extension. So that's what you have to ask yourself when you see questions like that.
Because this is the easiest visual, then you can put it together with all the other movements too, but make sure you can visually see that. So, should you get a question on, in the descent of a squat, what muscles are working and how are they working? We all will say, of course, the glutes and the quads are working, but I'm going down in the descent. So they're working, but they're working eccentrically or negatively. When I come up, look, see my quads, hopefully you can see, are contracted, so they're shortening. So they're working positively or concentrically. Same with the glutes. Okay, positively or concentrically as you're coming up, because I'm fighting gravity. When I'm descending, I'm going down with gravity. So it's negative, but it's positive because I'm working those
Well,
quads.
she's overcoming gravity.
What did I say? The opposite?
No, you said okay, another thing to understand is when you put a muscle on stretch, don't you get a more forceful contraction out of it?
Yes.
Why does a competitive cyclist, you see these competitive cyclists, why are they leaning over?
We have some, who's the competitive cyclist in here? Mike, do you ride? Mike?
When you see a competitive cyclist, they're not upright, are they? They're leaning forward. Why do they lean forward?
Center gravity.
Everybody's going to say to cut down the wind resistance. That's part of it. But the other thing is, if I lean forward when I am cycling, what am I doing to my glutes? I'm putting them on stretch. I'm taking advantage of the largest, strongest muscle in the human body. If you're a skater,
Oh, I just happen to be a skater. I has been.
you ranked #1 in the nation speed skating at one time.
Yeah, 14
Years
years
ago.
old, just a couple of years ago.
What does the skater do? How do they skate?
Here I go. Now, you guys, anybody watch Olympic speed skating? Come on. Okay, you don't
Okay.
see them doing recreational, like,
Right, so they can all see you rather than
Okay. You're
once
not
you get
gonna
up in the middle.
I don't want to get blinded by
Well, we put a cover over it.
over my mouth. I can't, okay. Just think about it, guys, really, a speed skater. Because I didn't know that. I wish I had taken the class before and I could have trained a lot smarter and prevented a lot of injuries. Obviously, we're not going to be skating like this. So when that gun's given, we are down like this, and boom, when we take off, we're stretching out as far as we can, and we're leaning over as far as we can. Little did I know, physiologically, it's because I was putting the glutes and quads on more stretch. So the more you put your muscles on stretch, the more forceful contraction you're going to get. We lean over as far as we can. You know when you watch it on TV, we're almost hitting the ice or hitting the floor, so you're like this. Okay? Do you understand why it wouldn't be as good standing up like this? Did I say it correctly, Dr. Abbott?
Yeah. Get in the middle if you would. Can I just borrow this for a second?
That's blinding my eyes.
No, you won't. Not now.
Okay.
If-
Okay.
If she's looking at her from the front, anterior view, if you look, what do you see going on? If she's extending the hip joint, what also is happening at the hip joint? Is that leg going straight back? No. It's also going out to the side laterally somewhat, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, she's really not only taking advantage of the gluteus maximus, but she's also taking advantage of
Median.
gluteus medius and gluteus minimus, because they're your abductors. So you're working all your gluteal muscles here, but particularly by leaning over, she is really putting her glutes on stretch to get a more forceful contraction out of the gluteus maximus.
Okay, so you guys just be sure you can picture that because you're going to get questions on that realm. So if you can understand, remember this is hip extension. This would be flexion. So when we're skating, if I'm bending over here, I'm really in hip flexion, aren't I? So then when I take that stroke, I'm getting a much more forceful contraction because I put my hips in so much flexion that I get a good forceful contraction when I do hip extension. Remember, this is hip extension. Correct, sir?
That's why you've got glutes.
I used to. We could get Bruna up there. But... All right. No, you'll be glad that you can visualize it, because you will get a question like that. Right,
Okay,
Miss
so I
Ellie,
just
you
wanted
already
to
got through all this?
quickly review the gluteus. And again, sort of reviewing the quads there, so important, they really are. Those are your two major anti-gravity muscles. We showed you those slides the other night. Remember, we did mention, for a lot of people, if they've never done an incline leg press, you can see when she brings that platform down to the point where she's at about that 90 degree between the legs and the thigh, look at the amount of hip flexion she's in. This allows you to really put your glutes on stretch. So we see a lot of people who've never experienced muscle soreness in their glutes before doing regular squats. Then they do the incline leg press, and for the first time, they really experience it. Okay? So we talked about these things, really important. We bring them up again in the strength and conditioning course. We mentioned lunge. Certainly this is an advanced exercise, particularly when you're carrying a barbell on your back. Tensor fascia, this is the last muscle we looked at. Remember, we said the tensor fascia crosses the hip joint both anteriorly as well as laterally. Rather than being directly to the front or directly to the side, it is in between, and therefore it crosses the hip joint both to the front anteriorly, to the side laterally, therefore it gets involved with both what?
Abduction.
Hip flexion and
Yeah,
abduction. Hip flexion and abduction.
Don't ever forget the end.
So we see it in a lot of lower body. You think of all the lower body aerobic activities you do. Really working. Tensor fascia. Okay, now, your muscles. Adductor. We talked about the gluteus medius and minimus and tensor fascia as abductors. Now we talk about adductors. When we see these muscles, and we've got 4 of them you're responsible for, you have the adductor brevis, magnus, longus, and gracilis, also pronounced gracilis. All 4 of these muscles cross the hip joint medially to the inside. Therefore, they get involved with adduction. Adduction. It might be pretty obvious if you look at someone doing something like a breaststroke kick like that, legs are apart and adducting. But what a lot of people don't appreciate, the muscles as adductors are bringing basically thigh, femur into midline. So if I'm doing a squat, when I'm doing a squat, as I go down, am I not getting some abduction as well as hip flexion? So as I come up, aren't my legs coming in, getting adduction? Plus, adductors are bringing your thigh back to midline. So my adductor muscles can also get involved with extension of the hip joint. Now, they seem a little weird.
Oh, boy.
Excuse my foot. But if I bring my foot up
Sorry, Jacques, you should.
and I try to drive my leg straight down, I'm using my adductors because I'm trying to bring the femur. Do this sometime. You know, people aren't watching, but put your hand on your adductors and you'll feel your adductors are working there.
This is best I can do.
So my adductors get involved not only with adduction, but they also get involved with extension, coming back to midline. Now if I go beyond midline and I start going into hip hyperextension, adductors, they become inhibited. Because if they're contracting, they want to bring me back to midline. So, from the same standpoint then, if my leg is up here in hyperextension, if I come over to something and I put my leg up there, and I am now trying to flex the hip joint, my adductors are working, trying to bring me back to center line. If you're climbing stairs, I'm in hip flexion, I need to extend the hip joint, I'm using not only my glutes and hamstrings, but I'm using my adductor muscles. And again, do this sometime. Climb stairs, put your hands basically in your crotch, and you can
Oy
feel.
vey.
You can
Don't
feel
do
what's
it.
happening. You'll feel those adductor muscles working. And a lot of people don't appreciate it. In fact, in reality, when you do a squat, you are probably getting better action. We showed you a picture of that MRI before. Remember the person doing a squat? You saw more action on the adductor muscles than you did on the hamstring muscles, than the hamstrings. Because when you're doing a squat, my adductor muscles are not only adducting, yes, but they are also extending the hip joint, bringing me back to center line. So when you think of all these lower body aerobic activities you're doing, you use your adductors. Use your adductors. When I step forward like this, yes, my hamstrings, as we said, are extending the hip joint, but from here to center line, my adductors are also extending. Then as I go into hyperextension, hamstrings are still working, but my adductors become inhibited because they would interfere with that action. So doing a squat, doing a leg press, horseback riding. Talk about an inner thigh exercise. There are some machines out there, inner thigh, they have adductor and abductor machines out there in facilities. If you haven't ridden a horse for a while, 24 hours later, you know, you've been hanging on for dear life with your adductors. You will feel DOMS. DOMS. Jane?
Sir,
Christians came in here.
I'll take care
You'll
of that.
take care of
Un
that.
momento, por favor, señor.
Okay. We think of people doing an activity like this, an adductor exercise, and it's true, it is an adductor exercise. However, where in everyday life do you ever do anything like that? You just don't. I use my adductors when I walk. I use them when I'm climbing stairs, when I run, when you do all these different aerobic activities, working with the lower body. Again, that's when you will really notice it, really notice it. Now all three of these muscles we're looking at here, going back to my adductor brevis, it's the most brief. Magnus, it has the most magnitude, and longest because it is longer than the adductor brevis. All three of these muscles cross the hip joint medially, therefore involved with adduction. The fourth muscle, gracilis, also pronounced gracilis, it is not only an adductor, but it comes down and it crosses the knee joint posteriorly. If it crosses the knee joint posteriorly, what action will it have on the knee joint? You've got to be knee flexion. Knee flexion. Again, all your lower body aerobic activities. One thing you will see here you did not see in the others was the leg curl. Doing knee flexion against resistance. Okay, 36 muscles down. 39. 3 more to go. Tibialis anterior. Tibialis anterior gets its name because it runs anteriorly along the tibia. You can see where this muscle originates, actually on the tibia, comes down and crosses the ankle joint on top superiorly, inserts down here. Now, because it crosses the ankle joint on top or superiorly, what action would it have on the ankle joint? Dorsiflexion. Dorsiflexion. Has to be a dorsiflexion. Has to be a dorsiflexion. Okay? So, tibialis anterior is one of a number of muscles that get involved with dorsiflexion, but it is the major one involved with dorsiflexion. And you will meet the others in the strength and conditioning course. But this is the principal dorsiflexion that we have. Remember, when it comes to the ankle joint, as we mentioned, in all other joints, the opposite of flexion was what? Extension, right? Yet when it comes to the ankle joint, and this is your ankle joint, right here, at the distal end of the tibia and the fibula interface with this large tarsal bone that sits on top of the heel bone, the calcaneus. That is your ankle joint. So this muscle comes down and it actually crosses on top. Therefore, it's going to get involved with dorsiflexion. Remember, top of the foot is referred to as the dorsal surface. The bottom of the foot is referred to as what? Plantar surface. So, dorsiflexion, opposite of dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. So again, all the other joints, the opposite of flexion is extension. I have toe flexors, toe extensors. This is the only joint where we have that exception. We do not use the word extension, just flexion. Dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. So, if I am doing, I'm walking on my heels and keeping my toes up, we call this what? Penguin walking. If I'm doing penguin walking, then I'm doing dorsiflexion. But if I do a heel or a calf raise, then I am in plantar flexion. So, uphill walking. Don't get much of that here in Florida, do we? In fact, we see people who will go out and run in Florida. We refer to Floridians as Florida flatlanders, because we're running on a flat surface all the time. You don't have to do that much dorsiflexion. Yes, if I didn't contract my dorsiflexors, my foot would drop and I could be sort of stumbling over my foot. But what happens if you have to start doing hill work? You've got to do more dorsiflexion. And we see a lot of people who may be in a road race down here, pretty good runners, and then they head up north and they've got hills, and boy, they're hurting. They really feel it. Really feeling it, you know, in this area because they're not used to working their muscles, primarily the tibialis anterior, that forcefully. So, you know you're heading north for a road race, you better get out and start doing some treadmill work on a grade. Start running bridges. But do things where you've got to work your dorsiflexors. So, uphill walking, penguin walking. Even when I'm doing normal walking and running, I'm going to have some action. Now, isolated dorsiflexion, we don't see many machines out there for this. This is one of them. Strength conditioning course, you will see this piece of equipment. Individual is sitting, a bench, chair, separate piece of equipment, and you'll see the dorsal surface is, you know, that pad right on top of it, and you can put plates in this device, and the individual does dorsiflexion against weights. Sometimes you might see a person who just sits on a table and they're hanging their, you know, the leg over a table, and then they may hang a weight on their foot and do dorsiflexion with a weight. Don't have that? Get a bucket. Put a little bit of water in it. As you get stronger, add more water to the bucket. And you're doing dorsiflexion, you know. You can use bands that are out there. You might hook a band onto a door and put it around your foot and put that band on stretch and then do dorsiflexion against resistance. It is felt that by strengthening dorsiflexors, you may help decrease the chance of developing shin splints. We're going to talk more about shin splints when we get to the area of injury prevention and emergency procedures. This is a common problem we see with a lot of people. And there's a real muscular imbalance between our dorsiflexors and our plantar flexors. Plantar flexors are much stronger, much stronger than our dorsiflexors. So there are different ways you can work your tibialis anterior along with other muscles involved in dorsiflexion. We have some other muscles that come down and cross the ankle joint superiorly as dorsiflexors. We also have muscles that come down, you know, they originate basically on the leg, cross the ankle joint, and then go right into the toes and work as toe extensors. But because they also cross the ankle joint on top, they are not only extensors of the toes, but they're also dorsiflexors. So tibialis anterior, that is your primary, your major dorsiflexor. Responsible for that. Again, when you go into the strength conditioning course, you are responsible for the 39 muscles we throw at you in this course, plus another 30 or 35 muscles we throw at you in that course. But once you get a feeling for how the muscular system is working, it's basic principle of kinesiology, then later on, we can go a lot faster going through the muscles because same concept. All you have to know is in your mind's eye, can you visualize where these muscles are located? Where do they attach? Where do they originate? Where do they insert? Where do they cross a joint? Remembering that concept of line of pull. When a muscle contracts, we pull insertion towards origin. Therefore, you can figure out what muscles are needed. So, as we said earlier in the course, when you're trying to figure out muscular involvement, you imagine your client as a skeleton. You don't have to let them know as you're looking at them on a piece of equipment that you're visualizing them as a skeleton.
Thank you.
Think of them as a skeleton. And then you think of the kind of skeletal movement. What kind of joint movement do I have to bring about to overcome this resistance that I have? So if I'm in something like that incline leg press, we know we have to get knee extension. We know we have to get hip extension. And so you're saying, okay, this is the type of skeletal movement I have to bring about. What muscles lie in a position crossing the joint that bring about the kind of skeletal movement I need? And when you can do that, then you can look at any exercise. In fact, you can look at any human activity, and you can figure out what muscles are working. Sad thing is, so many instructors out there today just try to memorize what muscles work, and you can't do it because there are an infinite number of exercises out there. Infinite number. Okay? Questions? Tibialis anterior? Dorsiflexion? Soleus. We're going to look at two muscles, soleus and gastrocnemius. These muscles, the gastroc and the soleus, are plantar flexors. Plantar flexors. They cross the ankle joint posteriorly by means of this calcaneal tendon, commonly called the Achilles tendon. Achilles tendon. Why is it called Achilles tendon? Top of your Greek mythology here?
Because of Brad Pitt, I believe.
It's not mythology.
It's Homer.
It's
It's the Iliad.
Okay. Why? You know.
His mother dips him into a magic pond. She holds him by the ankle, and so the back of his ankle doesn't get the magic water on it, so he thinks he can't be killed. So in fact, he gets hit by a poison spear.
That's right.
And that's why he's the first professor of literature, and that's why he and Brad Pitt got together on this.
Yeah, Brad and me.
That's right.
You want to be Achilles or
In fact, you remember that movie a number of years ago?
All the females do, Doctor. We like to watch that. It helps
Brad-
us
with Brad
understand
Pitt?
kinesiology.
Who played Achilles? And he finally got done in at the end, didn't he? Because he got hit in that area that was unprotected. Unprotected. Okay? So, soleus and the gastrocnemius share a common tendon. The Achilles tendon or calcaneal tendon here. Now, when you look at the soleus, you notice it originates here, and you're looking at the proximal end of the fibula, and then about the first third, basically, of the tibia there. Comes down, crosses the ankle joint posteriorly, then inserting here on that heel bone, the calcaneus. So it crosses the ankle joint. It's a uni-articular muscle. It only has action on the ankle joint. But if we look at the gastrocnemius, different story. Again, inserting by means of that Achilles tendon on the calcaneus here, crossing the ankle joint posteriorly. But it also crosses the knee joint. You see its areas of attachment up here. On top of these, called condyles that you see. So it crosses the knee joint posteriorly. If it crosses the knee joint posteriorly, what action would it have to have on the knee joint?
Flexion.
Flexion. Has to be a knee flexor. So this is a biarticular muscle. It is not only a plantar flexor, but it is a knee flexor. A knee flexor. The soleus lies underneath, deep to the gastrocnemius. Now, we look at activities like doing a squat or a leg press. If you think about it, when you were going down in a squat, what keeps me from falling forward? My plantar flexors. Plantar flexors. Certainly if I'm jumping, plantar flexion when I jump. When I do a calf raise or a heel raise. Have you ever seen people tell you this, if you're doing something like an incline leg press, and you're driving with a whole flat of your foot, and then they say just drive with the heels, not the balls of the feet? Does it feel a little bit different when you do that? It does, doesn't it? Because if I'm just driving with my heels and not the balls of my feet, then I have taken my plantar flexors out of the picture. They're no longer contributing to this force. And so often when we look at any kind of activity, we think there are multiple muscles that are getting involved with a given activity. And they're all contributing the force which is required to overcome that resistance. If I take certain muscles out of the picture, then basically I'm having to load the other muscles up. They're having to do the whole job by themselves. And so I can take my plantar flexors out of the picture when I drive with my heels. Some people, as a result, may even feel a little bit more action on my, call those three muscles back there?
Hamstring.
Hamstrings. Hamstrings. In fact, ever noticed when they would hang up ham, smoked ham and things like that, it would be hanging, they would have the ham and have a long thin cord from it, and it would be hanging up there like there was a string holding up your ham. So your hamstrings.
We're going to really win a lot of quiz shows now. We know the largest organ in the body is the skin.
Actually, if you got a hold of that A&P book that we've had on display for quite a while, you'll see pictures of it. That's a nice thing about that anatomy and physiology book. There are a lot of interesting little tidbits like that that may help you, more effectively hold on to some of these concepts. In any case, the soleus is strictly a plantar flexor. All your lower body aerobic activities, it's working. Now, when you are walking, you use your plantar flexors. So when I'm doing a low intensity activity like that, my soleus is really working. You get a little bit of action on the gastroc. The gastroc really comes into play when you get involved with some forceful activities like jumping. We need more forceful explosiveness. Interesting thing about the soleus muscle, we're going to talk more about this as we get into muscular training later on, but we did mention, remember there are two types of muscle fiber. We talked about slow twitch and fast twitch muscle fiber. Soleus is primarily made up of slow twitch muscle fiber, good endurance capabilities, So when you see people doing an activity for the soleus muscle, then typically they may be knocking out 25, 30, 35 repetitions. Because slow twitch muscle fiber, really geared toward aerobic activity, so we do more repetitions with it. Now the gastroc, again, plantar flexor, but a knee flexor. So you'll see something like a leg curl. Ever noticed when a person's on a leg curl machine? And we do a leg curl machine to target what muscle? Hamstrings. When you're doing a leg curl, whether it be one of these prone leg curls or perhaps one of these newer machines or where you do a seated leg curl, do you like to be in plantar flexion or dorsiflexion?
Dorsal.
Dorsiflexion. In fact, your body automatically tells you to go into dorsiflexion. Why? Because if I go into dorsiflexion, what do I do to this muscle? I put it on stretch. Therefore, I can get a more forceful contraction out of it. So you will find if you're on like a simple leg curl machine and your plantar flex, you can go so far. You stop. You go into dorsiflexion, now you get a better range of motion because you put this muscle on stretch. So when you're doing that leg curl exercise, it's not only the hamstrings. That's a major muscle involved. Prime mover, hamstrings. But you're also going to be using the gastrocnemius. So you see the same exercises here that you saw with the soleus, squat, leg press, jumping, calf raise, okay? But then you also see the leg curl. Now, sometimes You don't have this muscle list in your outline. I'm just throwing this at you because now and then you will hear these two muscles referred to collectively since they share a common tendon, Achilles tendon. Remember, the gastroc is a two-headed muscle, isn't it? When you look at it, you've got a medial head, you've got a lateral head. Okay. So I've got two heads there. I've got the soleus. That makes up three muscles. Sometimes you hear triceps, suri, the leg there. So sometimes you may see these two muscles referred to collectively as the triceps suri. Now you don't have that in your outline. I'm not holding it for it. Okay. Unlikely, but now and then that term does come up, triceps suri. Again, all your lower body aerobic activity. Here is your soleus muscle, soleus. Here is your gastroc. They have cut the two heads, flip them back here. You think you look at a posterior view of the knee here, right or left? It has to be left, doesn't it?
Left.
Here, semitendinosus, semimembranosus, and bicep femoris. Those are your hamstring muscles right there. Okay. So here is the soleus attaching, on the leg, where here you see the gastroc crosses the knee joint, therefore gets involved with knee flexion. Knee flexion. Standing calf raise. Balls of the feet in that position, you drop down. What position is he in right now with the ankle joint? Dorsiflexion. So if he's in dorsiflexion, what is he doing to the soleus and the gastroc? Putting him on stretch. Putting him on stretch. Then he goes into plantar flexion, working these two muscles. Standing calf raise, a lot of people find it a little bit awkward sometimes because the amount of weight they put on there, they may find some discomfort with the pads, actually on the shoulders. They do have machines, you'll see in the strength conditioning course, where you don't have to have your pads on the shoulders, and you can do similar to a standing calf raise without that kind of discomfort on the shoulders. Now, seated calf raise. If you're doing a seated calf raise, you are in, what's the movement that we see here? What kind of position is she in with the knee joint? That's called knee flexion. If she's in knee flexion, what has she done to the gastrocnemius? Taking it off stretch. Therefore, if it's taken off stretch, it cannot function as efficiently. So why do we do a seated calf raise? To get better isolation on the soleus muscle. You will not be as strong because you can't have the same involvement with the gastroc because you've taken the gastroc off stretch. So we do a seated calf raise with the idea of basically targeting the soleus muscle. Because the soleus is primarily made up of slow twitch muscle fiber, primarily slow twitch muscle fiber, you will see individuals will knock out 25, 30, 35 repetitions. A lot of other exercises, you may be typically doing 8, 10, 12 repetitions to failure. We do more repetitions here because of the nature of the soleus muscle, the kind of muscle fiber.
So the gastroc isn't the same as?
Now, the gastroc, you will see, can have a fair amount of fast twitch muscle fiber. Now, but everybody's differs. You'll see some bodybuilders out there. Years ago, we don't see much anymore, but they get good muscular development with the exception of the calf muscle. And they were literally getting calf implants. Yes. Calf implants. And then they were illegal because, some of these bodybuilders had good muscular development throughout the body, but they couldn't get the calf muscles up there. So they'd have calf implants. And we saw a lot of problems with calf. Now and then they'd slip, funniest looking thing you've ever seen. Pretty sad, really.
Stay
when you see the
natural.
implants
All
slips
your
out
competitors, stay natural.
And females are not the only ones that have implants.
Oy vey.
Okay?
Okay then.
And we're even seeing a lot of males even getting chest implants now to get more definition in the chest region. Don't just make fun of the women with their implants, you know. Guys are getting them too. Guys are getting them too. Okay. But in any case, we do a seated calf raise to get better isolation of the soleus muscle. Because it's slow twitch fiber, we do more repetitions with it. Now, common exercises you'll see particularly when working with athletes, particularly in trying to develop explosiveness. This goes back to a lot of the muscles we've been looking at. A person's doing an exercise we call a power clean. See the kind of beginning position he's in, straight back, hip flexion, knee flexion. Also, with leg angle forward, he's in dorsiflexion. Dorsiflexion. This particular exercise we call the power clean. Very popular. You will see when you work with football players and a lot of athletes, you know, this is an exercise they will do to develop explosiveness. But as he's coming up, he starts doing some plantar flexion, knee extension, and hip extension, keeping that back straight. Gets into this kind of scoop phase that you see there. Then it continues on. Now he is doing plantar flexion and a shoulder shrug. So if you go back and you think about it, we're getting this bar moving. And this is a very fast, I mean, when you look at a power clean, it's an exercise we use in learning an Olympic lift. We call it clean and jerk. In fact, it's interesting that Olympic lifting is the fastest sport in the Olympics. Olympic lifting is the fastest sport in the Olympics. In fact, it happens so fast that most people have no idea what happened. We don't see many Americans getting interested in this, unfortunately. In Europe, very popular, you see Olympic lifting. And the idea is there's a lot of application to sport when you start doing these kind of power moves. So, using his plantar flexors, using his knee extensors, he's using his hip extensors here. Back muscles are also, the erector spinae are used here. Using his plantar flexors, he's using those muscles with elevation, scapular elevation now. All these muscles are contracting almost simultaneously to get that bar moving up. And then when that bar gets up there, he literally pulls himself underneath the bar. In fact, there is a time when you get that bar moving, that bar is weightless. In fact, actually even has some momentum upward. And that's why if you look at an Olympic bar, which has good flex, or a power bar doesn't, when that person first starts lifting, you'll see that bar is angling down. You get at the top, when he's ready to pull himself under, you'll actually see the bar flex in the opposite direction because of that momentum. And he literally pulls himself underneath the bar to catch the bar, as you see there. This catch phase. So he's got these two pulls here beginning. First pull as he's coming up through that scoop phase. Second pull, plantar flexing, pulling as he does basically that shoulder shrug exercise. What's he working in the shoulder girdle area when doing this? Well, let's go back to the beginning. What is he working in the ankle joint area? He starts in dorsiflexion, right? He's plantar flexion. So what's he working in the ankle joint area? We just discussed these two. Plantar flexors, gastroc and soleus. What is he working in the knee joint? The extension. Quads, right? Quadricep. Hip joint? Primarily think of the glutes, but also there's going to be some action. Yes, some action on the hamstrings. And what else is really working? We just finished talking about 4 muscles called?
The
Adductor muscles are also working. Remember, they get involved with extension of the hip joint. So glutes are working, has some hamstring involvement, and adductors are working there. Okay? Full-time erector spinae, stabilizing the trunk. Now, really going into plantar flexion, really working. Gastroc soleus there. Doing that heel raise. He's doing a shrug, so what's he working in the shoulder girdle area?
He's definitely got the traps.
Which traps? Upper trapezius. Okay? This is what we expect you to be able to do. Look at an activity like this, break it down, and analyze what muscles are working. Now, since he is overcoming gravity throughout this whole exercise, we know all these muscles are working how?
Concentric.
Concentrically. You've got to be working concentrically. Okay? Power clean, which is really the first part of an Olympic exercise we call the clean and jerk. Clean and jerk. This is the clean portion of it. Olympic exercise called a snatch. Individual takes a wider grip on that bar. Typically we do something like this with a tape. We measure the distance from elbow to elbow, and that's the kind of spread you usually have in the bar. Now, whereas the clean and jerk is a two-part exercise, the snatch is a single exercise, one move. He starts the first pull, as you see here. And as before, plantar flexors, knee extensors, hip extensors. He's going through that scooping phase, but he gets it even higher. And then he drops down underneath and catches it. He pulls himself under the bar. He's not pulling the bar up over his head. Rather, he drops down, gets underneath it, and catches the bar over his head. Over his head. Do this exercise, tremendous flexibility. That's why in '96, when we had the Olympics in Atlanta, they measured the flexibility of all the different Olympic athletes. They found, obviously, as you'd expect, the most flexible of all Olympic athletes were the gymnasts. Second, Olympic lifters. Olympic lifters, the second most flexible of all the athletes. Again, fast forward. Here we see something called a push press, which is really the second part of a clean and jerk. Clean and jerk. So she's in this position where she has caught the bar up here, drops down into knee flexion and hip flexion, and then explodes, extending the knee joint, the hip joint, plantar flexion, and gets that bar moving up with that momentum. Then she drops down underneath and catches the bar. She doesn't lift the bar basically over her head. She gets that bar moving, and then she drops down underneath and catches the bar. So in a clean and jerk, you do the power clean, which is the first part, and then you do the push press, which is the second part of the exercise. Two-part exercise. Again, we don't expect you to get out there and start teaching these kind of exercises unless you go through additional training. A lot of our students do. You go through, the United States Weightlifting Association has a 3-day course where you can learn to basically teach Olympic lifting. You have to learn how to do Olympic lifting, and then you can teach it. When you're working with athletes, again, when you look at athletes, you'll see a picture of this later on in the gym, like working with football players. When you go into the gym, you do not see the kind of equipment you see in the traditional gyms that you're familiar with. It's not the equipment they use. Because again, most of the time when you go into a gym, you're sitting on something, you're relying on something. When you watch these athletes, they are on their feet when they're training.
USA weightlifting, is that a good one? Is that what you're talking
USA Weightlifting is out of Colorado Springs. In fact, it's the same area right around the corner from the National Strength Conditioning Association, which is located in Colorado Springs. They are the organization for Olympic lifting. They have a couple of certification courses you can go to. And if you know you're going to be working with athletes, then it makes sense to get certified to teach these kind of lifts. Because these are the kind of explosive lifts that allow you to increase vertical jump distance, for example, basketball players, volleyball players. And you will see that it is, in fact, if you go to, sometime you can, go out to Colorado Springs, go to the headquarters for National Strength Conditioning Association. You will see they've got a beautiful weight room there, but it doesn't, again, look anything like the weight rooms you see in your traditional gyms. Because they're training people for performance, training people for human movement. Everything you do are going to be multiple joint activities. We don't do isolation exercises like bicep curls and tricep extensions. Because when you're training for performance, you're working multiple muscle groups in an integrated way. Right, Stephen? Okay. You work with martial artists, they don't care so much about what the bicep, size of the bicep looks like. They're concerned about their ability to perform. Multiple joint type of activities.
Очень хорошо, right, Stefan? Да.
Depth jumps, explosive type of activity. Dorsiflexion, right? Knee flexion, hip flexion, straight back. When an individual is jumping, works his plantar flexors, gastroc, soleus, quads, knee extensors, his hip extensors, glutes, hamstrings. And what else we just talked about is working here in hip extension.
Adductors.
Hip extension. Adductor muscles. Adductor muscles. Remember, they're bringing the legs back to center line. And your rectus spinae muscles are working. So all those muscles are working how? As he leaves the floor and jumps. Eccentric. What about when he catches himself as he comes down the ground? He's working the exact same muscles, isn't he? But now they're working eccentrically. Eccentric. Okay.
Could you go back there and say that one more time? We want to be sure you guys can very readily
Yeah.
visualize that, because you're going to have to be able to identify that on the test. Right, Ms. Ingrid and Ally, which they did very well in this. So could you just go through that one more time for us to help our little brains, mine anyway?
He's preparing for this jump. He's putting muscles on stretch. He's going into dorsiflexion, so he's putting his plantar flexors, the soleus and the gastroc, on stretch. He's going into knee flexion, so he's putting his knee extensors, his quads, on stretch. Now that's true of the three vastus muscles. Is he putting his rectus femoris on stretch? The overall length of the rectus femoris doesn't really change there. You would think it would change from the standpoint he's going into knee flexion, but if he's going into hip flexion and the rectus femoris crosses the hip joint anteriorly, then he would be taking it off stretch in the hip joint. So the overall length of the rectus femoris does not change that much. You do not get as much force with your rectus femoris as you do with the three vastus muscles. It's working, but not to the same extent. In fact, you saw that picture with the MRI that we did with that bodybuilder doing a squat, where it showed you that the rectus femoris did not work as heavily as the three vastus muscles. So, putting our vastus muscles on stretch, working our knee extensors. In hip flexion, putting our glutes. Additional our glutes, we're putting our hamstrings going in much stretch there?
No.
No. Why? Because by going into hip flexion, I would put my hamstrings on stretch, but what am I doing down here? I'm going into knee flexion, so I am taking my hamstrings off stretch there. So overall, the length of your hamstrings does not change. Yes, they're involved here, but not as heavily, just like when doing a squat. Hamstrings work. But again, their overall length doesn't change because it's like they're being put on stretch in the hip joint area, but taken off stretch in the knee joint area. And our adductor muscles are going to work here. Okay? All those muscles are going to be shortening, so we get plantar flexion, knee extension, and hip extension, and they are all shortening, therefore they're working positively or concentrically as the individual jumps. As he comes down, he's going to catch himself. And you'll see as he comes down, muscles in the ankle joint, plantar flexors, they are going to be lengthening as he catches himself. As he comes down in that position of plantar flexion, but then as he catches himself, he ends up in dorsiflexion. So those muscles are going on stretch. Going on stretch. They're lengthening. And when a muscle is working and it's lengthening, it has to be working how? Eccentrically. Same thing with the quads, same thing with the glutes. These muscles are going to be working eccentrically as he catches himself. And if they weren't working eccentrically, didn't catch himself, he'd come down and hit the ground and just collapse. Okay. Questions on any of the muscles we've discussed?
So, you said for when you squat, you work from all the three parts, not the rectus femoris, right? Not that much.
You work the rectus, but it does not work as effectively.
To isolate would be the leg extension, would be the best for rectus femoris.
Well, again, if I sit in a leg extension machine, I am seated. If I am seated, what have I done to my rectus femoris? Taken it off stretch. Now, ever notice this when you're sitting in a leg extension machine? I'm sitting in that leg extension machine, I'm doing this. I get to that last one I can barely do. Don't I like to come up out of the chair? Why? Because I start to put my rectus femoris on stretch, and now I can get a more forceful contraction. But then a lot of people will come out of it and hyperextend low back. There was a time when you used to see leg extension machines where a person would lie down on his back. There's some older machines still out there. You lie on your back and you have the roller pads. Imagine I'm lying on my back and I'm doing leg extension. I'd get a more forceful contraction. But then people would arch. Because if I arch, put my rectus femoris in more stretch, I get a more forceful contraction, and I can end up stressing the low back area. So today, you typically sit. In fact, most of the machines, they will have a belt. You put the belt on to prevent you from coming out of that machine, which you automatically want to do because you know if you come out, you put the rectus on stretch, and you can generate more force. But then you may hyperextend the low back. If they don't have that belt, they have handles. And what do they tell you to do with those handles?
Hold for dear life.
Don't just grab them and squeeze and get that white knuckle effect and take your blood pressure up higher than it already is. Those handles are there for one reason. Pull on the handles to keep your butt into the seat so you don't come out of the seat and end up stressing the low back area. Low back area. Okay? Any other questions?
That would be the best exercise to isolate?
I'm sorry?
That would be the best exercise to isolate the rectus femoris?
For the rectus femoris, if
To
you
isolate the
really,
rectus.
you really want to work the rectus femoris, in fact, there are a couple of older machines out there where you didn't have a seat back. And you might be pulling on this and seated up, but you could actually lean back. And if I lean back, then I get more action on my rectus femoris. Putting it on stretch. But as soon as I sit down, I take
What
it
about
off.
when you do lunges, extending lunges?
Well, the same thing with a lunge. We really work our quads with a lunge because we're catching ourselves. But as I go into a lunge, what's happening at the hip joint? So I'm taking my rectus femoris off stretch. See, that's the problem. The rectus femoris is a biarticular muscle. It is both a hip flexor and a knee extensor. When I'm doing a squat, or if I'm doing a lunge, I need to use my knee extensors. Do I want hip flexors? No. I want hip extensors. So this is where the rectus femoris is sort of getting a mixed message. It's like, well, we need it for knee extension, but we don't need it because we don't want hip flexors. But the rectus femoris cannot say, well, I think I'll work in the knee joint, but not the hip joint. It doesn't work that way. When that muscle contracts, it is going to pull on both areas of attachment. So in order to offset or counteract hip flexion, which we don't want, then we're contracting hip extensors. So basically, I mean, when I'm doing a lunge, I want to use knee extensors. I don't want to use hip flexors, because if I use my hip flexors, I'm fall on my butt. So, rectus femoris does both. It is trying to extend the knee joint at the same time it is trying to flex the hip joint. But I have to counteract, offset that undesired action of hip flexion, which I can do with my glutes, because they're a hip extensor, large, strong muscle. So this is the idea that muscles work as neutralizers, and this happens so often when we're dealing with biarticular muscles. They're needed in one area, but not the other area. How do we prevent that undesired action? I contract another muscle that will counteract undesired action. That's what a neutralizer is. It neutralizes, counteracts, offsets undesired action. This is going on in the human body all the time. All the time. When we're involved with these multi-joint activities. Okay?
Excuse me, so while it's fresh in your mind, you guys, just hopefully you highlighted on 5.11, 5.11, right in the middle, number 22, rectus femoris. You probably wrote in there, of course you know it's biarticulars, we just went over because it's flexion of the hip and extension of the knee. Make sure you remember the rectus femoris, one of the quad muscles, is biarticular. The other three, vastus, the vastus intermedius, vastus lateralis, vastus medius, they are all uniarticular. That's why he just went over so much on the rectus femoris, so you could understand. You know, it's a little confusing. Also, see me on breaker, I'll say the number again. We're getting closer now to final exam, which is on Wednesday, September 16th. Some of you have gotten together in groups, hopefully. If not, you know, exchange numbers, get together in groups so you can study together, or if you want the number of the tutor, you know, call Tom, the tutor, and then there's a girl, Diane, further north. But don't wait till last minute, but you could, if you really study it on your own, if you're doing like I suggest every class, read those review questions and answers and make sure you can visualize and conceptualize those. If you can't, you know, we're here for you to go over it again, but now we're going into the cardiovascular. Do you guys feel, and what happens, I'm telling you, every single class, this is the most demanding. Whether it's our bodybuilders, our Olympians, our doctors, somehow it's just tough. It took me a couple times to really visualize and understand kinesiology. Some people, some of our competitors did very well in kinesiology, but it does take a while, so we're here for any questions on it. Do you have anything that he went over right now? I would ask now, don't wait till the last minute. Oh, so they know everything, Dr. Epp. It's the best class you've ever had.
Remember, it's not a matter of just knowing where the muscles are located, but it's visualizing how they cross the joint, the kind of action you're going to have when you pull insertion towards origin. For example, over the years, we've had numerous massage therapists come through the program. And they understand the muscular system from the standpoint of muscle location, but they are just as challenged when they come through this course of understanding muscle function. In fact, we literally have teachers, instructors from massage schools who come through this course just to understand, you know, muscle function. We see individuals, you know, physicians who come through the program who, you know, even for example as an orthopedic, you know, they understand something about, you know, muscular involvement, but not truly muscle function as it comes to exercise. And we have seen physicians coming through the program be just as challenged in understanding the muscular system. Chiropractors coming through the system just as challenged in understanding muscular function. But this is what it's all about when you're working as a personal trainer, understanding that muscular system. And we really encourage you to come back because, I mean, individuals have already been through it fast, of course. Been through it fast, he's back again, angry, passed it, but back again. You'll be surprised if you come back and sit through this course again. Michael, same thing. Well, he successfully passed the course. But when you come back the second time, you will find you get a lot more out of it because you built up your knowledge base. You've got a greater foundation from which to work. And people come back and they say, you never said that the first time. Oh, yes, I said it the first time. It just escaped me the first time. Okay?
It was Greek to us the first time.
Yeah. And so, you know, we really encourage you to come back and sit through the course again and be surprised about how much more you'll get out of it. And really appreciate it because unfortunately there's some people that I just want to get through and get my certificate and move on. You never stop learning in this field. So one of my greatest frustrations I have in this field is I wish I had more time to get out there and study more about the field. I don't know it, you know, as much as I would like to know it. And you just never stop learning. And when people go through a whole course, even the 360 hours, we will tell you, now you have a solid foundation from which you can build. Don't stop your education. You've got to continue to go to educational. Biggest frustration I have are people who get through this foundations course and they think they understand exercise enough to be a personal trainer. And I guarantee you, you don't. You don't have that kind of knowledge base. Just don't. Okay, cardiovascular training.
Excuse me,
commonly-
Dr. Abbott, right after when we just finished kinesiology, you see 6, sports nutrition 6.0. You get, that's the homework you have. This is so easy that if you read, I shouldn't say easy, if you read it, it's very explicit with the review questions and answers. We don't take the time to go through this chapter because we have a whole separate 10-week course just on nutrition and weight management. Okay, so you're responsible, and this is a slide presentation as you see by the author Nancy Clark. She's excellent, makes it very clear. Usually everybody gets, those that read this chapter like I'm telling to you right now and do the review questions and answers at the end, it's all right there, okay? That's what you're gonna have on it. That's why he's skipping over now to 7.0 aerobic training. Did you wanna highlight anything
No,
that
you-
they may?
You have 10 questions related to nutrition on your final exam.
Is that
I
slideshow?
cover about 5 of those.
No, I mean, you can order, as far as the slideshow, she has one, we just printed it all out.
Okay.
Was that your question, Michael? Yeah. Can they just order that? They want it's exactly, the slideshow is exactly what you see in print, right, by Nancy Clark?
Well, she has a couple of books she's written. Certainly
But you're
order that.
just responsible for this,
But if you
Jan.
just read what you have there, you'll have no problem at all with the
All right.
questions related to nutrition.
Well, I wouldn't say that, I had to read it.
And again, the
quite a few
idea is
times.
here, it's providing you with some basic nutritional information, and then we get into a lot more detail with a 60-hour course just in nutrition education and weight management.
It's just a basic, remember, you will get 10 questions on that. Just like each section, you're gonna get 10 questions, except for double that up for what he just went over. Muscular training, kinesiology, you're gonna get 20 questions just on muscular training. What muscle is working and how is it working? You have to understand the planes of movement. And then he has a separate 10 questions that he calls kinesiology. Okay, so now
Okay,
we're,
cardiovascular training.
turn over to 7.1. the
Commonly,
head
we
page
use
says-
this term aerobics. We are doing cardiovascular
7.1.
training when we get involved with aerobic activities. There's a name you should be familiar with. Dr. Kenneth Cooper. How many have heard of Dr. Cooper? Wow. Okay. He is considered the founder of aerobics. He started this whole aerobics movement in this country years ago. He was an officer with the Air Force, doing a lot of research in this area. He has his own Institute for Aerobics Research in Dallas, Texas. If you have an opportunity to go out there, they run different courses. And they run excellent courses. They've got really qualified individuals who are teaching at the Institute for Aerobics Research. And I just highly recommend it if you have an opportunity to go out there and take some of the courses they do offer. And you also better appreciate us when you do, because you'll see compared to what we charge and they charge. But very worthwhile place to visit. So Dr. Kenneth Cooper. Now, in order for something to increase your aerobic capacity, your cardiovascular strength, you have to have a workload that is basically going to be working large muscle groups in a rhythmic manner. That means these muscles are contracting, relaxing, contracting, relaxing. But by definition, aerobic exercise is low intensity exercise. That's something that surprises a lot of people. Because it is low intensity exercise, that's why you can continue that activity for an extended period of time. If you think about lifting a heavy weight, that's a high intensity exercise. You can't continue to lift that heavy weight for an extended period of time. If you look at doing something like a sprint, even short of a sprint, but running fairly fast, that can be a high intensity activity that you could not sustain that intensity for an extended period of time. You will be limited. All boils down to the energy systems we talked about before. Remember the 3 energy systems? The phosphagen system, the lactic acid system, and the aerobic system that we talked about. So, by definition, something to be appropriate aerobic exercise stimulus, we're going to work large muscle groups in a rhythmic manner where they're contracting, relaxing at a low intensity level. We're going to increase our oxygen demands. And we typically are going to increase them in the range of 50 to 85% of. Remember that word? Acronym FC stands for what? Functional capacity. The maximal capacity at which we can function from the standpoint of oxygen consumption. That's what we mean by functional capacity. So that I am going to have to increase my oxygen consumption in this neighborhood between typically 50 to 85% of my functional capacity, or the maximal amount of oxygen I could consume when pushed to the limit. Typically, if you're working in this range of 50 to 85% of your maximal oxygen consumption, you'll probably be working in the range of about 60 to 90% of your maximal attainable heart rate. And the idea here is I could take a person, put them on a treadmill, gradually increase the speed and grade on that treadmill, and we get to a point where after a while, a person's heart rate could go no higher. They hit their maximal attainable heart rate. Now, in the same vein, as I'm increasing the workload on a treadmill, I would see I'm increasing my oxygen consumption, but I get to a point where after a while, I can increase the workload and I cannot increase my oxygen consumption anymore. I've hit my maximal oxygen consumption. And that typically is going to occur around the same time. Not exactly, but around the same time as my maximal attainable heart rate. Maximal attainable heart rate. So I need to work with a stimulus, working large muscle groups, rhythmically, low intensity, where I'm increasing my oxygen consumption, and I do it for an extended period of time, and I do it on a regular basis. And when I do, I can bring about physiological changes or training effects that allow me to basically become stronger from the standpoint of increasing the strength of the heart muscle, to make it a more efficient pump, and also increase my ability to start using more oxygen at the muscle level. If I can use more oxygen at the muscular level, I can break down more fuel, carbohydrates and fats, releasing more energy to resynthesize more ATP, my energy currency. Therefore, I can do more work. The name of the game is oxygen consumption. Now, what kind of cardiovascular response do we have when we get involved with these kind of aerobic activities? We use this term hemodynamics. Dynamics. What's going on really with the circulatory system here, or even hemo? You're thinking of the ability to pick up, use more oxygen. In fact, heme means what? Heme, H-E-M-E, iron. In fact, it's our red blood cells, due to the fact that they have iron, allows us to pick up oxygen. When we see hemodynamics, we're really talking about this ability, pick up and move more blood and oxygen through the system, get more oxygen into muscle tissue. Now, we all know that when you begin to exercise aerobically, you increase your heart rate. So we abbreviate it all the time, HR for heart rate. So as I increase my workload, I will increase my heart rate in beats per minute. So you'll see this. When we say BPM, we're talking beats per minute. My heart rate is going to increase. We have what we call a linear relationship between heart rate and workload. Linear. Linear means what? Line. A line. A linear relationship between heart rate and workload. Now that's what you see here. What we're looking at over here on this axis, we call this the y-axis. You're looking at heart rate in beats per minute, BPM. Over here on this x-axis, we are looking at workload, and it happens to be speed, miles per hour. So we have an individual, and we're going to look at this individual working at different speeds, for example, on a treadmill. And we're going to look at him at two different times: pre-training, prior to starting an aerobics program, and post-training, after he's been training for a while. So we'll start with a pre-training in green here. So we have that person who's at 3 miles an hour on that treadmill, and that's his heart rate, 90 beats per minute. Then we take him up to 4 miles an hour. Now he's getting up there, neighborhood about 110 beats per minute. And 5 miles an hour, 130. And 6 miles an hour, about 150. Get him up to 7 miles an hour, he's over here, about 170 beats per minute. So we have plotted his heart rate against known work loads, and then we connect them with a line. In fact, what do we have? We have almost a straight line, don't we? So that's what we mean by a linear or line relationship between heart rate and workload. Now this individual undergoes training. Then we bring him back later on for follow-up testing to see how he's improved. We put him back on the treadmill, same speed. Now his heart rate is 80 beats. Originally it was 90, now it's 80. 4 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour. And you notice, every case here, his heart rate is a lot lower than it was initially. So we go ahead and we plot the heart rates against the known workloads. We connect them, and again, we have just about a straight line there. A linear relationship between heart rate and workload. What has happened here is the individual is able to accomplish the same workload with a lower heart rate. Why? Because the heart has become a stronger, a more efficient pump. And as we showed you before, with training, we increase our stroke volume, that every time the heart beats, it ejects a greater amount of blood. If it ejects a greater amount of blood with each heartbeat, then it does not have to beat as often to move the same amount of blood.
Question, Dr. How does that affect the blood pressure, the workload, increasing workload?
As a result of that,
Right.
you can start doing the same workload with a lower blood pressure. Because you'll find that blood pressure is really a result of, you're looking at heart rate and peripheral resistance to blood flow. So one of the things we see with training is that in general, you will see as a result of aerobic training, people end up having a lower blood pressure. Now, not always, but in general, yes. As a result of aerobic training, we see a decrease in blood pressure. Not only at rest, but also during exercise for the same workload. This is one of the real benefits that we see when people get involved with aerobic activity, that they can actually decrease their blood pressure.
But initially, would that blood pressure increase as workload increase?
Absolutely. In fact, you take our fitness testing course, you'll be surprised. Fitness testing course, you have to administer stress tests. And you will take blood pressure with each workload. If that systolic blood pressure does not go up, you have to stop the test. You got a problem. It's called heart failure. Okay? We'll show you a picture of this later on.
Right,
Yes.
students in the fitness testing, Miss Bruna, Allie, Ingrid, and Brett. Who else is in there? See where the
Tomorrow
people-
night,
Okay,
they're
yes,
going to start
Cynthia.
to note this, because tomorrow night, these students are going to be working on ergometers, putting people at different workloads and taking their heart rates and blood pressures, and they will see how their blood pressure is going to elevate with increasing workloads. Okay, now, same concept here with linear relationship. This also gets to a concept of what we do and why we test people. Here you see again, on that y-axis, heart rate, beats per minute. Now over here, instead of speed, miles per hour, as you saw with the previous slide, we're looking at workload, which is expressed in oxygen uptake, in liters of oxygen per minute. So here is, under scenario A, original test. We find that when that person's at about 70 beats per minute, that is the workload they're accomplishing. About 4/10 or 2/5 of a liter of oxygen. That's their oxygen uptake, liters per minute. So that's 4/10, same as 2/5 of a liter of oxygen. Then we notice when they get their heart rate up to about 100 beats per minute, they're up here, just a hair above, 6/10, basically 3/5 of a liter of oxygen. So they're increasing their oxygen consumption. Same thing there, there, and there. We go right up to 180 beats per minute. So we're looking at increasing workloads, increasing heart rate. Again, we plot heart rate against workloads, we connect it, and what do we have? What kind of relationship is that? A linear relationship between heart rate and workload. Now we're going to say this individual is a 20-year-old individual. When coming up with a prediction of a person's maximal attainable heart rate, we take a constant of 220 and we subtract the person's age. So we're saying if this individual was 20 years of age, we take the constant of 220, we subtract their age of 20, we would say that their maximal heart rate then would be 200 beats per minute. That's just a prediction. In reality, we do not know what a person's maximal attainable heart rate is until we give them a maximal stress test and push them to the limit. Now we stop this individual at 180 beats per minute. Because when we do submaximal stress testing, as personal trainers should do with their clients, you would not take a person to maximal. This is only done in a clinical setting, typically, where the person is hooked up to an EKG. You've got the crash cart with all the drugs, the defibrillator, physician standing by in case there are problems. So in what we call submaximal stress testing, as personal trainers do, we take them up within a range that is below their max heart rate or submaximal, typically the kind of heart rates that they would achieve in normal aerobic exercise. So we stopped this individual at 180 beats per minute. But then we extended that blue line with that white arrow, and we took it right up to our predicted maximal attainable heart rate. You see this broken blue line, we're subtending this line down here, and we're saying, if we took this individual to the max heart rate of 200, this would probably be their oxygen uptake, in the neighborhood of about 1.7, a little bit above 1.7 liters of oxygen per minute. So we're predicting what their oxygen consumption would be. Then that person undergoes training. We bring them back later on. And we again note the kind of workload they're accomplishing for the same heart rates. And we plot heart rate against workload. Again, we see that linear relationship. So we can notice, for example, when that person's heart rate originally was 120 beats per minute, they were about 8/10 or 4/5 of a liter of oxygen. That was the oxygen consumption. Now, we see that that same heart rate, their oxygen consumption is greater, almost up to 1.3. So for the same heart rate, they are consuming more oxygen. If they can consume more oxygen, they can do more work. Do more work. They can run faster, for example. It's the same heart rate. Now, just as we did with scenario A, we do it with B, where we do a prediction in what would be their maximal oxygen uptake. So we stopped them again at 180, extended that line up to the predicted maximal attainable heart rate. With that broken red line, subtend that, and we come down to about a 2.5. So originally, we predicted that person would have about a 1.7 liters of oxygen per minute. That would be their predicted oxygen consumption. 1.7 liters per minute. Now they're up to 2.5. They've gone from a 1.7 to a 2.5. Isn't that about 8/10 or 4/5 of a liter more? They're literally consuming 4/5 of a liter more oxygen per minute. So they can break more fuel down, release more energy to resynthesize more ATP. So they can do more work. I think we mentioned before, every liter of oxygen you consume burns how many calories? About 5 calories. So if this
Remember
individual
that.
now is consuming 4/5 of a liter more oxygen per minute. Okay. 5 calories per liter, 4/5 of a liter, that's 4 calories. This person can literally burn 4 more calories a minute because of their increased aerobic capacity here. Are you hanging in there? Making
Doc,
sense?
Can we assume that they have the max max heart rate is gonna stay the same even after
Well,
even
this is
after
gonna be a
exercise?
short period of time. You will see later on, as we get older, our max heart rate does go down. It decreases with age. But we're saying, this could be a period of, a few months. And that person has made that kind of improvement. In fact, you will see, when you get involved with aerobic conditioning, your most dramatic improvement will be typically in the first 6 to 8 weeks of a program. 6 to 8 weeks of a program. So, as a trainer, you bring that person in, you do a submaximal stress test, you determine this is your predicted VO2 max. Then you bring them back a couple of months later on, and they're up here. This is how much you've increased. You are providing your client with feedback showing them how they've improved their aerobic capacity. That provides that taste of success, and nothing succeeds like success. Now, we not only do it with such things as submaximal stress testing, we bring them back to show them how they're decreasing their percentage of body fat, how they're increasing their muscular strength, their muscular endurance, their range of motion. And we're giving them feedback to provide that reinforcement that the program is working and keeps them on a program. The most effective motivational tool you have as a personal trainer is pre-testing and post-testing, and you will see the majority of trainers out there today don't even test people. They're not testing them. And they're not taking advantage of something which is so important for two reasons. Not only the fact that it allows you to provide that reinforcement to keep them motivated to stay on a program, but now you know a conditioner and you can design a program that meets their capabilities. A safer, more effective program.
Can you go back one slide, please?
Okay.
Can we use the prediction also here for
Prediction?
the prediction? Yeah, let's say we stop at 160, and then to imagine what would be the maximum speed at 180 or 200 could be?
Yes, you could come up with a prediction on speed. But we would also so you have to take into consideration also oxygen consumption. And that's what we're doing here. Because like in our fitness testing course, one of the things we learned is with metabolic calculations, how to determine what a person's oxygen consumption is. So with these formulas that we use in our fitness testing course, you'll actually see the kind of speeds that you can be achieving with different oxygen consumption. But this gets into something that you're not going to understand now. Okay. But those of you who are taking the fitness testing course, this is where we can get involved with metabolic calculations. We can determine a person's oxygen consumption, therefore their calorie consumption, because every liter they consume calories. We can come up where we can set short-term and long-term goals, and we can tell people based upon knowing oxygen consumption or calorie consumption, we can tell people how long it's going to take them to get down to a new weight. Because when we do body fat testing, one of the things we can do with body fat testing is we can tell a person what they should weigh at a new percentage of body fat. We can determine how many calories they're going to have to burn to get down there. We can determine the number of calories they're burning with exercise. And you can start setting short and long-term goals for individuals and providing that kind of feedback, which is so motivational. So again, it's not only motivational, but when you do testing, dramatically increases the safety aspect of what you're doing, as well as your effectiveness in program design. Okay. You will find if you go on for certification with ACSM and NSCA, you're going to get a lot of questions related to this. And you will be given different scenarios, and in the scenarios, they will tell you the results that you get not only with a health appraisal, you'll get all sorts of information about, their blood pressure and their triglycerides and their cholesterol and their LDL and their HDL and their blood sugar. They'll give you a lot of that kind of information. They're also going to give you results of a fitness profile. Based upon that information, they're going to ask you questions. You read scenarios, you get a picture of that individual as far as their health, you get a picture of their health from the health appraisal, you get a picture of their level of physical fitness based upon a fitness profile. And you combine health appraisal, fitness profile, and gives you a bigger picture of the individual, what you can and can't do with them. That's the difference you were going to find if you take a lot of these fly-by-night certification programs out of there. And I see them all the time. They don't even ask you one scenario. If you take ACS and NSA, you're going to have a number of scenarios. A number of scenarios. Okay, stroke volume. We've already thrown this term at you. Remember, stroke volume is the volume of blood that's ejected from that left ventricle with every beat, with every stroke of the heart. Remember that? We spent time talking about stroke volume before. Now, stroke volume hits its maximal value during submaximal work. Submaximal work. Your stroke volume improves with conditioning. As you become more physically fit, and your heart becomes a stronger, more efficient pump, then every time it beats, it can inject a greater amount of blood. You increase your stroke volume. I'll give you some ideas. I have a person who is untrained at rest. They may have a stroke volume in this neighborhood of 70 to 80 milliliters of blood is being injected with each beat of the heart. Now, milliliters. Dealing with exercise science, we use the metric system. You need to become familiar with the metric system. The rest of the world uses the metric system. Okay? The United States is behind.
I don't understand
the times.
why the United States
Way
don't
behind. The
care.
metric system makes a lot more sense than the English system. A lot more sense. You go to European countries, even if you go to El Salvador.
From
they use the metric
Brazil.
system.
All these guys, well, most of the people know.
Yes. In Peru, they use the metric system. Okay? So the fact is that
Don't make us feel
it
so.
makes a lot more sense because everything is in tens. I can remember back in the 1950s when they said, oh, 10 years, we'll all be using the metric system. And there has been such resistance. People hate to get away from something they're comfortable with, which is too bad. When you read literature out there, you start reading research studies in the area of exercise science, you're going to see you're going to be dealing with the metric system. And so it's important that you do understand it. Okay. So, a liter is just a little bit more than a quart. Mill, how many milliliters in a liter? A mill is what?
1,000.
1,000. So you've got 1,000 milliliters in a liter. 1,000 milliliters in a liter. That's what mill means. So we're looking at this individual, about 80 milliliters per beat. If this individual is untrained during exercise, he may get up to the point where he's ejecting 120 milliliters with each beat. Because when we begin to exercise, we bring more myocardium. Remember that word, myocardium? That's the muscle tissue that surrounds those four chambers of the heart. We bring more myocardium into contraction so we can squeeze those chambers more forcefully. Real concern is that left ventricle. And so as a result of squeezing that left ventricle more forcefully, we eject a greater amount of blood. We can go from 80 milliliters at rest up to about 120 milliliters. Now, what if we take a trained individual? We take that same individual and that individual undergoes training, and then we find that at rest, that individual may be ejecting up to 110 milliliters per beat at rest. This is why, as a result of aerobic training, your resting heart rate comes down. And this is something you share with your clients. In fact, you can have your clients, you teach them how to take their heart rate. They can wake up in the morning and take their resting heart rate, just as they wake up. Just awaken from a fitful nightmare, that's not the time to do it. But when they wake up, have them take their resting heart rate. And over a period of time, they will see that their resting heart rate is lower when they wake up in the morning. Now they are seeing the actual benefit of that aerobic exercise. During exercise, this person may get up to 170, whereas originally he could only get up to 120 milliliters. Now, because he's strengthened that heart, it's a more effective and efficient and stronger pump, he ejects a greater amount of blood with each beat. Therefore, he can move more blood and more oxygen at the same heart rate. Now, as we said, your stroke volume will level off at a submaximal level. We're looking at oxygen uptake. this is increasing workload. We're increasing our oxygen consumption, therefore we're increasing our work. Here we're looking at our stroke volume in milliliters per beat. Here's the person at rest, 60 milliliters per beat. This is typical. 60 milliliters per beat. Starts exercising. Now it goes up here, almost 90. Maybe a little over 110. Approaching 130. 130. So we see increasing stroke volume. Then it levels off. Now, may continue to work. We see, in fact, at the end, it may even drop off a little. You may get to the point where your heart is beating so fast that you don't have enough time in between heartbeats for complete refilling of that left ventricle. Therefore, your stroke volume at really high heart rates can even come down a little bit. But the important thing is, we increase our cardiac output for two reasons, as you will see. One is we increase our heart rate with exercise, and the other is we increase our stroke volume. Every time the heart beats, we start injecting a greater volume of blood. So, when I exercise, I increase my heart rate. I continue to increase workload, heart rate keeps going up until I hit max heart rate. When I increase my workload originally, my stroke volume is going to go up. Now, my cardiac output, total amount of blood moved per minute, minute volume, is going to be based on both an increase in heart rate and an increase in stroke volume. Here you see light exercise. You see heart rate indicated here, stroke volume. I increase my workload, my heart rate goes up, my stroke volume. Now, increase the workload, heart rate goes up, but stroke volume doesn't. Remember, stroke volume, as we said, our stroke volume hits a max value during submaximal work. So it's hitting our maximal value, submaximal. We haven't pushed to the end. So after a while, any increase in cardiac output is solely due to an increase in heart rate. So initially, your cardiac output, minute volume, total amount of blood you're moving on a per minute basis, initially it is due to an increase in both heart rate and stroke volume. But after a while, increase in cardiac output is solely due to an increase in heart rate because stroke volume has leveled off at a submaximal level. Questions on that? Okay, take a break. Take a break.
Everybody remembers that just going out these doors, the ladies.
Understanding. Initially, stroke volume increases, but at a submaximal level, stroke volume will level off. Will level off. Okay, ejection fraction. Ejection fraction. Now, in reality, when we talk about ejection fraction, we're really talking about stroke volume, but we're just looking at it in a little bit different way. Because when we talked about stroke volume, we were talking about the actual amount of blood which is being ejected from that left ventricle. When we talk about ejection fraction, we're going to say what percentage of that blood in the left ventricle is being ejected. Ejected. So, definition, percent of blood ejected from the left ventricle.
Oh, sorry, we turned the page, you guys, for ejection fraction. So you turn the page, so we're at the top of page 7.2, ejection fraction. And we are responsible in this class for that definition, is that correct? Okay, so make sure you highlight that. Know that it's the percentage of blood volume in the left ventricle, which is ejected. You'll be very happy that you understand that. Okay, then, super.
Now, ejection fraction, it increases during exercise and with conditioning. So we'll look at an untrained individual here. That untrained individual, maybe a very severely deconditioned individual, may have an ejection fraction of 40%, meaning that when that left ventricle contracts, 40% of the blood is ejected, 60% remains. But then during exercise, the ejection fraction may get up to 60%. trained individual, such as yourself, right now you might find that about 60% of the blood in that left ventricle is being ejected at rest. Then you begin to exercise, you may get up to the point that 80% of that blood is going to be ejected. We see some world-class athletes out there who may get as high as 90% of the blood in that left ventricle may be ejected. World-class athletes. Could you have 100%? No. In fact, if you had 100%, that would mean you would have to completely collapse that left ventricle. And that lining, we call it the endocardium, the lining would rub against itself, you'd tear it up, and you'd bleed to death. So we do see world-class athletes getting as high as 90%. But really,
Would you repeat again why we couldn't be at 100%, so we can understand that?
because you would completely collapse that left ventricle, and so you would have tissue rubbing upon tissue. Remember we said the inside lining, endocardium, outside we have the myocardium, muscle tissue. Outside of the myocardium we had the pericardium, perimeter pericardium. So if it completely collapsed, you would tear up the lining of the inside. But you may even notice, if you ever happen to pick up ACE, American Council on Exercise, the personal training book, in the first chapter, it says 100% can't happen. I'd like to think it was just a typo that was not proved correctly, but when it came out with the next edition, it still said the same thing.
Oh, boy.
Well, you find, in general, it's a good book, a lot of good information in the ACE personal training book, but there are mistakes. One of them is a picture they have in the cover of the person responded to correctly. Okay. But the fact is, there's still a lot of good information in there. We've had a lot of people who picked up that book and started reading it and found it somewhat confusing. They said, I just don't think I can pass that exam by just reading the book, and then they come here and they find that by sitting in the class it makes a big difference compared to trying to just get it by reading. Some people can. But then the fortunate thing is with so many of these certifications, people may read something and you can get through an exam just as a result of the knowledge you have, but you've never been tested on skills. You don't know how to do body fat testing. You don't know how to do stress testing. You don't know how to work with people and setting them up with equipment and picking up errors that are made when people are working with strength equipment or other type of activities. And that's one of the biggest problems we have with all these certification programs. So ACSM and NSCA have been relying upon videos as their practical portion. But right now, they are looking very seriously at going back to what they used to do with a practical hands-on. So it used to be years ago that I used to work as an examiner for ACSM. And people would come in addition to the written exam, they would have to go through a practical where they would have to demonstrate their ability to do various tests to include stress testing. And ideally, that's what it should be. But the biggest problem they found is the expense involved with that kind of testing when you're doing testing around the whole country. So they've gotten away from it, but they're getting a lot of criticism right now. And NSCA is as well. They're getting criticism that they don't have a hands-on practical. Hands-on practical. And that's true with all these certification programs typically you see out there. You don't have a hands-on practical. You just take a written exam. Okay, so we see that individual is trained, ejection fraction goes up. May get up there in that neighborhood of 80%. Important to understand, you may have some people, I can remember I had one death case I was involved with where the person, ejection fraction at rest of something like 25%. And that's information in the physical exam report. But he joined a fitness facility, they never looked at the physical exam report, never got any clearance. And here was an individual who was just a walking time bomb and ended up having cardiac arrest and dying as a result of it. And yet if they had done what they should have done by doing a good health appraisal, seeing that kind of information, you would realize that this person has to be handled with kid gloves. Basically should have been in a kind of cardiac rehab program. We see people like that who are joining facilities. Most facilities, you know, if you'll sign, they'll go ahead. So an interesting article. You remember I talked about a lot of facilities are, you know, relying on client failure. A brand new article just came out that saying the same thing, that they determine your facilities typically are going to rely when you're not getting fit. That you will sign up, be paying on a regular basis. And in fact, they figure that they have to have about, based upon the number of people who use the facility with regularity, they have to have 10 times that many signing up. 10 times that many. And this is the nature of the health club industry out there. Just a sad fact. Okay, cardiac output. We threw this term at you before. Remember, it's the same as minute volume. Total amount of blood that's put out per minute. Now, cardiac output is expressed as a Q, with a little dot over it. Quantity of blood moved per minute. That's a little dot over it. It's per minute. Per minute. Cardiac output is based upon your heart rate, how many times your heart rate beat per minute, and your stroke volume, how much blood is being ejected with each beat. So if I multiply my stroke volume by my heart rate, I have my cardiac output. Now there's equipment out there that can actually measure your stroke volume. In fact, a lot of people going to a physician may be told to go in and have a kind of ultrasound where they can literally measure a person's stroke volume. See what percentage, is the amount of blood that's being ejected. What is their ejection fraction? So they can get stroke volume along with ejection fraction. Sometimes athletic teams, like the Miami Dolphins, I know have done this many times, where they would actually, prior to fitness, go in there, ultrasound, find out what their stroke volume is, after training, come back and see the kind of improvement they've had in stroke volume. So, cardiac output increases during exercise and with conditioning. It increases during exercise. Why? Because your heart's going to beat faster and you're going to increase your stroke volume. Therefore, you're increasing your cardiac output during exercise. You will move more blood on a per minute basis. But also with conditioning, your cardiac output is going to increase. We look at an untrained individual. Heart rate, 80 beats per minute. Stroke volume, 70 milliliters per beat. Multiply that by that, 5,600 milliliters. That is the person's cardiac output. That's the same as 5.6 liters. Remember, there are 1,000 milliliters in a liter. So 5,600 milliliters would be the same as 5.6 liters of blood being moved per minute. Now, I said before, as you sit here right now, how much blood are you moving on a per minute basis? Remember? In the neighborhood of 5 to 6 quarts, 5 to 6 liters. Obviously, larger people a little bit. But that's what you're moving at rest. At rest. So basically, you'll find that typically your cardiac output could be your total blood volume. In 1 minute, your cardiac output is usually close to what is your total blood volume. Total blood volume. Now we take that untrained individual and he begins at exercise. We get him up to 150 beats per minute. His stroke volume is now going up to 110. Multiply it out, 16,500, which is the same as 16.5 liters of blood are being moved per minute. He's literally sort of tripled his cardiac output from rest. He's moving 3 times as much blood during exercise. Follow that? Make sense? Okay. Now, we take that individual and we train him. He becomes more aerobically fit. Now his resting heart rate's a lot lower. It used to be 80 beats per minute. Now his resting heart rate is 60 beats per minute. But his stroke volume has gone from 70 to 100. We multiply that out, we get 6,000 milliliters, which is the same as 6 liters. So we're going to say that individual is not a steady weight. We'll say basically the same weight. At rest here, he was moving 5.6 liters. Now he's moving 6 liters at rest. Why would he require more blood, greater cardiac output at rest now than he did before? At rest, both situations, say his rate hasn't changed. Why would he require
blood pressure goes down? To supply some blood now?
Well, he's moving more blood per minute. He's moving more oxygen. He's going to use more oxygen per minute. Why would he need more oxygen per minute now that he's fit than when he was unfit?
He's got more cells that need the oxygen.
He has a higher metabolism. Higher metabolism. So even at rest, he's actually going to be burning more calories now. He requires more oxygen at rest. Now, this individual exercises, gets it up. We give him a stress test, for example. Here he got up to 150 beats per minute. Here he's 150 beats per minute. Here his max stroke volume was 110. Now he's up to 150. 22,500 with 22 points. He has literally increased his cardiac output by 6 liters of blood per minute. Per minute. He's moving that much more blood. He's moving that much more oxygen. He can deliver more oxygen to muscle tissue. He can do more work. More work. Now, we put these together. SV stands for? EF stands for?
Ejection fraction.
And that little Q with a dot over it? Cardiac output.
Cardiac output.
So cardiac output and minute volume are the same thing?
Same thing.
And that's the Q, the little dot over it.
Yep.
Cardiac output
That means
and minute volume,
Quantity
same
of
thing.
blood moved per minute. Per minute. Now, we're using these sort of pictures with blood in it to better get an analogy here of what's going on with these 3 concerns. Remember, blood from our left atrium is ejected into the left ventricle. So here we have our left ventricle. And at the end of EDV, end diastolic volume. Remember, diastole is the relaxation phase of the heart. Systole is the contraction phase of the heart. So during the relaxation phase, at the end of diastole, relaxation, just before contraction, we see there is 100 milliliters of blood in that left ventricle. 100 milliliters. Then, it says end of ventricular contraction. That left ventricle contracts, and we have ESV, end systolic volume. Systole, contraction. Right after the contraction, what is left in that left ventricle? 40 milliliters of blood. Now, we started with 100, we're left with 40 milliliters, which means we ejected 60 milliliters. You with me? That's your stroke volume. We had 100 when it was filled, 100 milliliters. At the end of the contraction, there's only 40 milliliters left in there, which means we ejected 60 milliliters. So 40 from 100, 60, that's your stroke volume. Stroke volume, 60 milliliters. Now, ejection fraction. We ejected 60 milliliters. 60 milliliters. How much did we have when it was filled? 100 milliliters. So we ejected 60 milliliters out of the 100. And diastolic volume. Into the relaxation phase, that left ventricle was filled with 100 milliliters of blood. We ejected, out of that, we ejected 60. So 60 is what percent of 100? 60%. That's our ejection fraction. Cardiac output, heart rate times stroke volume. If we say that individual has a heart rate of 80 beats per minute, and they have a stroke volume of 60 milliliters, their stroke volume 60 milliliters, 80 times that, 4,800, 4.8 liters per minute. That is the individual's cardiac output, heart rate times stroke volume. Again, 4.8 liters is just about 5 quarts of blood. On average, Americans run about 5 quarts. Larger people, maybe even up to 6 quarts. 6 quarts of blood. Okay, so just putting those three together: stroke volume, ejection fraction, and cardiac output. Now, one of the things quite often you'll see questions may be asked. I know ACSM and NSCA ask a question. As a result of training, as a result of undergoing aerobic training, cardiovascular training, what happens to your stroke volume? It will what? Increase. As a result of aerobic training, what will happen to your ejection fraction? It will increase. As a result of aerobic training, what will happen to your cardiac output? It will increase. Later on, you are going to see, we're going to be talking about maximal attainable heart rate. We've mentioned it a couple of times, but maximal attainable heart rate does not increase with training. In fact, if anything, sometimes maximal attainable heart rate may decrease a little bit with training. So they love to catch you with this one. Which of the following are going to increase with aerobic training? And they'll have stroke volume, ejection fraction, cardiac output, maximal attainable heart rate. And you sort of get used to that increases, that increases, that increases. And therefore they'll say, all of the above are true. And you'll jump on that one and you'll be wrong. Okay? Maximal attainable heart rate does not increase as a result of training. And you'll see a slide a little later on where it can even decrease a little bit.
Is our total amount of like the chamber size, is that going to increase?
Say again?
Like the amount of blood that can be in that chamber, does that increase? But basically the size of the size of the muscles increase too.
Oh, remember we showed you a picture of what happens to the heart as a result of aerobic training and strength training? And as a result of aerobic training, we increase the actual size of that left ventricle so we can hold more blood. Another reason why you will see an increase in stroke volume. Increase in stroke volume, because it holds more blood. With strength training, we said you increase the thickness of that myocardium. So now I can even squeeze a little bit more forcefully. That can increase,
so we can actually increase the stroke volume, but keep the same or even decrease the percentage.
No, you start increasing the thickness of that myocardium too, you'll squeeze it more forcefully, you can eject a greater amount of blood in there. You can increase our ejection fraction. Ideally, we like to see people involved with both aerobic activity as well as resistive activity. Now, put all this together, something that may make a little bit more sense, we'll do the twin test.
Jane.
You know that Jane is an identical twin. Years ago.
Excuse me, Dr. Abbott. That's your opinion. That was the fun 70s, okay? You did not have me sign a model release. I thought you said you're going to take that down. I'm calling my sister in Colorado. That is on time. The good old leg warmers. Okay.
Actually, I heard leg warmers are going to start to come back again.
Pardon me?
Leg warmers are going to start to come back.
Okay.
Who knows which one is Jane and which is his
Because
sister?
I don't.
Jane's on the left.
Yeah.
Jane's on the left.
I honestly don't. My vision's not that great. I honestly don't know.
Jane's on the left.
See, my husband doesn't know, so I don't want to tell him. What, you guys think that that's me?
Yeah.
What do you think, Dr. Abbott? Or do you care? He doesn't even know which one.
I think it's all right.
For the first time, you actually got it. Okay, because there's a few. Yeah, because you had said the left before. Everybody thinks it's the left.
You're
But
right.
yes,
Yep.
yes.
That's Jane.
It is. I couldn't. I had to get up closely. Doctor, we could have switched, and I could be Joyce. Only her husband would kill you. Yes. All right, Professor Michael, why are you laughing? Okay, I'll talk to you about it after class. And why are you laughing, Robert?
I don't know.
Okay.
We're having a flash dance.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
A
John.
number of years ago, we did a test with the two of them right in front of class. And that is the fact
At
that
the
they
university.
both have been nationally competitive skaters and national champions in skating, and we're both aerobic instructors, as you can see from those old aerobic outfits that they have.
But it's coming back in, leg warmers,
They-
yay.
They both had the
We'll get
exact
some for
same,
Suzanne.
had the same percentage of body fat. I mean, truly identical. And I still get them confused now and then. But weighed the same, identical circumference measurements, body weight, everything was identical. And then her sister ended up going into banking for about a year and stopped exercising. And what we did is we brought them in front of class and we did body fat testing on them. Now they both had been about, it was 11 or 12% body fat, I think. They were down in the very lean category. And the nice thing about being identical twins, you know, you double your wardrobe. If you're an identical twin. And after about a year, no longer, even though they both still weighed the exact same amount, body fat percentage changed. Your sister, I think, went up to about 20%. So even though they weighed the same, due to a change in body fat, they could no longer share clothes the way they used to. Because remember, if I take an equal weight of muscle and fat, fat occupies a 20% greater volume. Remember talking about that? 20% greater volume. So, weigh the same.
Wait,
but
could you
they're-
say that again so we can understand? Because remember, you guys, you get a trick question. You know, which weighs more, a pound of fat or a pound of muscle? Well, they both weigh a pound. It has to do with the volume that's consumed. But you know, it can catch it quickly. So, Dr. Abbott, would you repeat that again so we
Yeah,
understand?
we showed you a slide of that. Remember the
Oh, and we've got a
An
pound of
initial-
fat and a pound of muscle up
that
there.
if we take an equal weight, whether it be a pound or 5 pounds or whatever, take an equal weight of muscle and fat, fat occupies a 20% greater girth measurements. That's why you'll see an individual can lose muscle, put weight back on, and that weight they lose in muscle tissue, they put that same weight back on in fat. Their weight may not change, but their girth measurements change.
And I am Janet. I'm your wife. And don't forget. Okay.
Then we also did a step test with them, where we had one of these 12-inch benches, you know, see these Reebok steps with 4 risers on each side, and had them stepping up and down at 24 lifts per minute. Now, they were doing the exact same workload because they still weighed the same. So they were stepping up and down, same weight, same height, same steps per minute. So they did the exact same workload, which requires the same amount of oxygen to do that workload. And we had heart rate monitors on. But whereas her sister was up there about 150 beats per minute, Jane was down there around 110, 120 beats per minute. And that is because, as a result of continuing to exercise, she had a stronger heart, greater stroke volume, greater ejection fraction, greater cardiac output for the same heart rate. Therefore, her heart did not have to beat as often to move the required amount of blood and oxygen through the system. Does that make sense? And again, this is something, you know, even if you do, and there are ways you can do what we call a graded exercise test using steps. You can do pre-testing and post-testing, bring people back, and they can see how they can do the same workload later on at a lower heart rate.
And we just did this last class for those of you that are in the fitness testing on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That's what we're doing. The graded, we did the step test, and then tomorrow we'll be doing on the ergometer. So we set different workloads on the ergometer, and all this comes to life. And everything you learned here, you apply it in the laboratory, which is really fun. Isn't it, Ingrid?
Yes.
Yes. She said with enthusiasm.
Okay, remember we talked about the concept of blood shunting, redirecting, reprioritizing where the blood is going to go, based upon arterial constriction and dilation. We can go ahead and constrict arteries to those areas where we can sort of cut back some of the blood flow. We don't need to move as much, the abdominal region, intestinal tract. We don't need to move as much to the kidneys. But we can dilate those arteries, taking blood to working muscle tissue. So here you see an individual at rest. Their cardiac output is 5,000 milliliters, which is the same as what? 5 liters of blood per minute. And the kind of colored pie segments you see here indicate where that blood is being distributed and a percentage. Such that here we may see something like 1,000 milliliters going to muscle tissue, representing, about 20%. 1,000 being 20% of 5,000. You see the amount going to the heart, to the skin, brain, and so on. Then we see what happens to this person who really begins to exercise. And they go from a cardiac output of 5,000 to 25,000. They've increased their cardiac output 5-fold. They are moving 5 times as much blood. Why? Because the heart is beating faster and it's beating more forcefully. They've increased their stroke volume. They've increased their ejection fraction. Okay? So, moving a lot more. Whereas here you might have had about 1,000 milliliters of blood going to muscle tissue. Now we may have 21,000. Most of it is going there. Now we're still getting adequate amounts of blood and oxygen to different areas of the body here. We can look at the heart here, which had about 200 milliliters. And if we go to over here, looking at the heart, where is our heart here? About 1,000. You see, we're going from 200 to 1,000. We have increased the amount of blood going to the heart 5-fold, 5 times as much. Why are we moving 5 times more blood to the heart? It's working harder, beating faster, beating more forcefully. It needs more oxygen. It needs more energy. It needs more energy.
Okay.
We can look at the skin with about 300 milliliters. Then if we come over here to the skin, we've what? Doubled. Why would we double the amount of blood going to the skin?
Cooling off.
Cooling off. We're picking up that heat which is being generated internally, picking it up in the blood. We have to move this heated blood to the surface of the skin where we can dissipate. Get rid of that. Even if we look at the brain here, it's at about 700 milliliters. And where's our brain over here? 900. We're getting a little bit more, aren't we?
25 days.
So during exercise, you may actually be delivering a little bit more blood and oxygen to your brain. Some people, when they're involved with a rhythmic activity, on a treadmill, maybe they're outside jogging, they just have some unique insights. A lot of people have found when they're in this kind of repetitive type of activity, you don't have to think like being in an aerobic dance class or a step class where you got to think what you're doing. But that kind of repetition here, you may find you're doing some planning for your business and things of that nature. You're having some unusual insights because you're actually getting increased blood flow and oxygen delivery to the brain during exercise. So we're still moving blood to these areas. Okay?
Excuse me, doctor, did we leave a number off there because is Kaiho, am I pronouncing it correctly? Yeah. The total number, if you added all of this up, it's how much?
No, here's what I was
Well,
just looking at the other side there. The muscles that is taking a liter. So here you would have 21 liters, so you had 4,000 left over, which doesn't add up.
There's 4,000 over here.
No, there's
Well,
more.
if you have maybe a little bit over here, the 4,000 you're saying.
Yep.
A little bit over. Yeah. But it gives you an idea, the same concept here, how the majority of the blood is going where? To working muscle tissue. Vasoconstriction dilation.
What's the relationship of eating and going to the exercising, swimming pool or stuff like this?
I'm sorry.
The relationship between eating and exercising, because
Eating and exercising?
Yeah, because they say like it's dangerous to go to the pool if you
Well,
eat. And related to the,
you used to hear this all the time. Never go swimming after you're eating and have cramps. Well, that's one of the myths that they've disproven over the years. However, when it comes to exercise, if I just eat, I'm moving a lot of blood through the intestinal tract that goes through the digestive process. Then I start exercising, we got a conflict of interest. So you're likely to see your meal again.
That's a nice way to put it.
You know, if you've had a big meal, you may even be waiting a couple of hours before you exercise. Now, it depends what you eat. If I have a meal which is not that big and is primarily carbohydrate digests the fastest. Then protein, and then fat. So if you've got a small meal, carbohydrate, some people may have a small amount of carbohydrate and they can go in the gym and they can exercise half an hour later without a problem. If I have a large meal, particularly if there's a lot of fat within that meal, it takes a lot longer to digest that meal. That's where, you may have to wait a couple of hours before you get out there and exercise because there's this conflict. We're trying to shunt or move more blood to the intestinal tract that goes through the digestive process. Then during exercise, we want to move it all, most of it, to working muscle tissue. And basically, we're going to sort of cut back on that going to the intestinal tract And what happens? You know, we got all this food in here and we can't handle it. So we better get rid of it. And up it comes.
What would be a recommended time? 1 hour before exercise?
Depends upon
On the size.
the size of the meal and the content of the meal. And there are individual differences. Some people, I mean, there's some people who can go out and have a regular meal, maybe 15, 20 minutes later go into the gym and exercise without having a problem. So there are individual differences here. You've got to get to know how you respond. How you respond.
With this improved blood shunting, is there a different corollary or relationship, or improved relationship with the autonomic nervous system?
No, the idea here is your body automatically says, if I'm getting involved with exercise, I'm going to have to be moving more blood
Right.
to this area. And I can basically be, I don't have to make that same kind of increase to other areas. We're still moving. If you look at this, we're still moving, you know, plenty of blood to these other areas there.
Right.
We're not completely shutting them down. Not completely shutting them down. So this is a concept of blood shunting that we talked about before. Okay? Now, in order to understand what aerobics is all about, you have to understand a concept that we call arterial venous oxygen difference. Commonly referred to as AVO2 difference. Arterial venous oxygen
This
difference.
is at the top of 7.3.
Here we're looking at our circulatory system, and we have just picked up oxygen from those air sacs in our lungs. Remember, we refer to this as external respiration. We have exchanged carbon dioxide and oxygen. And so we have those capillaries surrounding those air sacs, those alveoli. And we pick up oxygen, our blood basically has been reoxygenated. Our blood is more reddish in color in our arteries. When we look at the systemic circuit, remember we said in the systemic circuit, blood, arterial blood, is going to be oxygenated blood, more reddish in color, whereas in the venous system it's more bluish in color because it's been deoxygenated or lower in oxygen content. So our blood has been reoxygenated. Then we do a blood draw, an arterial blood draw here. And we see that we have about 20 milliliters of oxygen per 100 milliliters of blood. Now this oxygenated blood is going to different areas throughout the body, all the different tissues of the body. At this point, as a result of internal respiration, we also call it cellular respiration, we're going to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide at the tissue level to include the muscle tissue. That's what you see here. What we're looking at here is what? The sarcomere. Sarcomere. So now we're involved with internal or cellular respiration. Tissue is picking up oxygen, we're giving up carbon dioxide. Our blood now has become deoxygenated. Now that does not mean there's no oxygen. There's still oxygen in the blood, but a lower content. So now we're in our venous system, and if we do now a venous blood draw, we might see that looking at 100 milliliters of blood, just as we did over here, we have 15 milliliters of oxygen. So in our arterial blood, we see 20 milliliters of oxygen per 100 milliliters of blood. In our venous system, we see 15 milliliters per 100 milliliters of blood. We have a lower oxygen content because some of that oxygen has been given up, taken up by tissues throughout the body to include muscle tissue. Okay? Make sense? Now, we're looking then at the difference in oxygen we have in our arteries versus our venous system. That's not a dot, a little line over V. This is representing venous. Arterial, venous, oxygen difference. Here we are at rest. Here's my arterial blood with 20 milliliters of oxygen. Here is my venous system where he said we had about 15 milliliters. The difference is because some of that oxygen was picked up. So we have a difference here, arterial, venous, oxygen difference. The difference here is about, indicated here, 4 to 5 milliliters of oxygen per 100 milliliters of blood. That's our arterial, venous, oxygen difference. What happens during exercise? Here's our blood arriving with 20 milliliters. Here's my venous system now with 5 milliliters, not 15 as you saw there, but 5. Our arterial venous oxygen difference now is 15 milliliters. We have picked up a lot more oxygen because we're exercising. We need more oxygen. Now, what accounts for our ability to pick up more oxygen and use it at the muscle level? Remember before we said there are 2 goals in aerobic training? One is we want to increase our cardiac output, the total amount of blood and oxygen we move throughout the body. But secondly, we have to increase our peripheral circulation and the ability to use oxygen at the actual muscle level itself. So changes occur at the muscular level that allow us to extract more oxygen from the blood and get it into muscle tissue where we can use more oxygen. Because if I can use more oxygen, I can break more fuel down, carbohydrates and fats, and even some protein, to release more energy, to resynthesize more of my energy currency, ATP. Now, 4 major changes that are occurring. One, I'm going to increase vascularity. I've got so many blood vessels coming into muscle tissue. I'm going to start opening up new blood vessels. There are some blood vessels that are literally closed down. They're collapsed. It's like maybe having a road and it's, the road has been closed. And we're going to open up some of these roads. We're going to open up some of these blood vessels. We're going to increase vascularity. That means I can now bring more blood and oxygen into the working muscle tissue. I'm going to increase my myoglobin content. Myo means what?
Muscle.
Muscle. Globin, globular protein. Remember we talked about hemoglobin? It's a globular protein that contains iron, heme, and that's what picked up oxygen. We talked about our red blood cells have hemoglobin. Picks up oxygen. Myoglobin is a globular protein in muscle that sort of hangs out at the membrane wall. It acts as a transport vehicle. It picks up oxygen. Just like hemoglobin picks up oxygen, myoglobin picks up oxygen. And then it transports it into the cell to the mitochondria. Remember we said mitochondria are those organelles, microscopic organs within a cell. But mitochondria are the little power plants, the little factories that get involved with aerobic metabolism. And we literally start increasing the number of mitochondria that we have in muscle tissue. I increase my myoglobin content. I'm going to have more myoglobin now hanging out at the membrane wall of the cell to pick up oxygen and then transport that oxygen off to the mitochondria, and I increase the number of mitochondria. Now within the mitochondria we have our little workers, like workers we have in a factory. Within the mitochondria we have enzymes. Enzymes are, remember, special proteins that act as catalysts. They expedite chemical change without being lost in the process. And we actually increase the number of enzymes that we have within mitochondria. We're increasing the number of workers within the factory. And so these 4 changes are occurring to allow us to not only extract more oxygen from the blood by having, increased vascularity to bring more blood and oxygen to the area, more myoglobin to pick up that oxygen. Then we transport it to the mitochondria and we can start processing more. And we open up new factories, new mitochondria. We increase the number of workers, the enzymes with it. All of this allows us to increase our arterial oxygen difference, arterial venous oxygen difference. Again, this is that cellular respiration, internal respiration. Or as you saw here, at rest, maybe we're only going to be extracting 5 milliliters That was our arterial venous oxygen difference, 5 millimeters. But here, because we're exercising, we need more oxygen. We are going to now start extracting more oxygen from the blood, picking up in the myoglobin, moving into the mitochondria, processing more oxygen. So we can release more energy to resynthesize more ATP. Sort of gave you a kind of picture going on. Think of this as a cell. You have little factories in there. We've got our blood vessels, our vascularity. We think of these as roads or tracks. We have to bring our materials, energy, nutrients, carbohydrates, fats, even some protein, oxygen. They're all going to be transported to those working cells. So we open up new avenues, opening up new roads, new tracks, so we can bring more blood and oxygen to the tissue. We have more of those transport vehicles. We can transport it into the factories. We actually increase the number of factories. We increase the workers within the factory. You can liken this to sort of gearing up for wartime. During war, we have to increase, our materials. So what do? We start opening up new factories, don't we? Start bringing in more workers within the factories. We have to, maybe even build some roads, start being able to bring more of these raw materials into the factories, transport them to the factories, so we can do more processing for raw materials. In a way, when we exercise, you can think of it like the body's going to war. Okay? Just as we face stresses during war, your body is going to face the stress of exercise. It's got to start creating some of these physiological changes that we call training effects so it can better handle this stress. And this is what we do with the aerobic system. We not only increase the cardiac output, but we have to create changes from the standpoint of arterial venous oxygen difference. Remember I said before, just getting the heart rate up there and strengthening the heart muscle in and of itself is not going to be aerobic. We can do circuit training, where I'm in a piece of equipment and I get my heart rate up during one exercise, very strenuous exercise, then I move to another one, working different muscle groups, and another one, and I may go for 20, 30 minutes, and I keep my heart rate elevated for an extended period of time. I will strengthen the heart muscle. I will make it a more efficient pump. It can be good for heart health. But in order to create these changes at the muscular level, I have to be involved working the same muscle over an extended period of time with low intensity to bring about these kind of stresses where I will increase my vascularity, increase mitochondria content, increase enzyme activity within the mitochondria, increase my myoglobin content so I can pick up more oxygen and deliver more oxygen to mitochondria where we can do aerobic metabolism. Okay? Makes sense? Arterial, venous, oxygen difference. So for something to be aerobic, I not only need to increase my cardiac output, but I need to increase my arterial venous oxygen difference. I've got to create these kind of changes at the tissue level. Questions? Really important concept. This is what aerobics is all about. That's what aerobics is. And a lot of people have this mistaken idea that all I've got to do is elevate my heart rate, keep it elevated for a period of time, and I'm going to become more aerobically fit. Hey, there are medications out there that will jack your heart rate up for 30 minutes an hour. It's not going to make you more aerobically fit. In fact, it won't be the healthiest thing to begin with. Okay, blood pressure. In this course, we just expect you to at least understand the concept of blood pressure. We do not expect that you will know how to take blood pressure in this course. You go on to our fitness testing course, you will learn how to take blood pressure. You will learn not only how to take blood pressure while a person is at rest, but you will learn how to take blood pressure while a person is exercising. Something every personal trainer should be able to do. Remember we talked about risk factors and positive risk factors for heart disease. And blood pressure is a primary, a major risk factor for heart disease. major risk factor. So this is why, as we said, as a minimum in screening, you would do a health history in an individual and you would take their blood pressure. Because there are people out there with high blood pressure that do not know they have it. Why we call it the silent killer. The silent killer. And we see people jumping into exercise programs today with high blood pressure, don't know they have it. They may start to feel dizzy, they don't feel well, they fall off of their exercise program, and they never found out they had high blood pressure. So we do a tremendous disservice to clients in a fitness facility if we don't screen them for blood pressure. Now, what is blood pressure? We're going to be looking at the pressure of the blood in a large artery here coming down the arm called the brachial artery. And we're going to be looking at that blood pressure, the pressure of that blood against the artery wall at two different times. One during the contraction phase of the heart, or the systole. Remember, systole is the contraction of the heart. And also during the relaxation phase of the heart, or the diastole. So blood pressure is going to be expressed in a fractional form, where we look at our systolic blood pressure, the numerator, over the denominator, our diastolic blood pressure. We measure blood pressure in millimeters of mercury. The reason we use mercury is because it's very, very heavy, about 13 times heavier than water. If I had one of these manometers, these measuring device, and I use water instead of mercury, it'd go through the ceiling. So we use mercury, and we measure it in millimeters of mercury. If I take my blood pressure and I find out that my systolic blood pressure is, let's say, typically we hear something like 120. If my systolic blood pressure is 120 millimeters of mercury, that means that during the contraction phase of the heart, the pressure of that blood against the arterial wall is forceful enough to suspend a column of mercury 120 millimeters high. If my diastolic blood pressure is 80, that would mean the pressure of the blood against the artery wall during the relaxation phase of the heart. There's enough pressure to suspend that mercury 80 millimeters in height. When we take blood pressure, we use a device called a sphygmomanometer, also pronounced sphygmomanometer. If you can't pronounce it, then we say a BP unit. Okay? But we have a device that has a cuff, and inside that cuff is a bladder. And we wrap that cuff with the bladder inside around the arm. In fact, we get the middle of the bladder and we place it over the brachial artery. You literally have to palpate for that artery. When you have your blood pressure taken, when you go to the doctor, I'll bet 95% of the time your blood pressure is taken incorrectly. In fact, we had a study, it came out 2 years ago. In fact, our fitness testing course, remember that page? You got a whole page. Determined 93% of the time when blood pressure is taken in a clinical setting, it's taken incorrectly.
Who did that study, Dr. Abbott?
A couple of universities did.
Columbia.
Yeah.
Why?
93% of the time, when blood pressure is taken in a clinical setting, it's taken in. I have yet to have my blood pressure taken correctly when I go to the doctors.
We're talking going to a medical doctor, you guys are at a hospital, and just to reinforce this, can you imagine 93% of the time when you're at your
Well, that means
trusted?
we never had it taken right either.
What?
That means we've never had it taken correctly.
That's right.
Actually, because I was taking
The
my,
problem is some of the time, people may not be put on blood pressure medication when they should, or they may be put on blood pressure medication when they shouldn't.
Oh.
And this is, I mean, I think the last time I went, I counted 4 different things were done incorrectly when my blood pressure was taken. And Jane is standing behind the person, don't say it.
his eyes are going, and I'm going, no, but you guys, it's going to be serious, because you're going to be taking care of your loved ones, whether it's your parents or your grandparents. And a few years ago when I took my 94-year-old, no, I'm sorry, he was only 91 at the time, okay, and for his blood pressure, and luckily I had learned how to take blood pressure properly, so I knew exactly what it was. He was very low, that's why I got good genes from him, but so his blood pressure was never over 100 on systolic and very low on the diastolic, which I knew, and I had just taken it that day. And so when I took him in, because you know, when you, if you've worked with any of your loved ones, when they go in for some major surgery, they have to get screened, and if their blood pressure's high, they won't do it, especially at the age of 90. He was so healthy that they said he could do bilateral knee replacement. So I took him in to the cardiologist, medical doctor, cardiologist. Well, and his technician, of course, was taking it. She took it and she goes, oh, she said it was 140 systolic, which you're going to see, you're going to highlight that. You have to know that. That's mild hypertensive. And I forgot the diastolic. I said, oh, she was new, she was very sweet. And I said, excuse me, but I do know how to take my father's blood pressure and he won't be able to have his knee surgery. Could you just take it one more time? She was very nice. She said, okay, sometimes they won't. She took it, she goes, oh ma'am, you were right. She was 30 millimeters off, you know. It was like I told her, only 100. So it's going to be good. You're going to use it one day and you're going to be glad. It's a
What
shame.
did she do wrong? I mean, what did she do wrong?
Well, first of all, she didn't palpate for the brachial artery. She just pumped it right up there and.
We have had in our fitness testing course nurses who I've had to fail because they couldn't take blood pressure. And I hate to say it, I've had 2 physicians I had to fail, couldn't take blood pressure correctly in the fitness testing course.
Well, I can understand that because they have their technicians do it.
Yeah, but one of them got very upset and went to take the ACSM, and that's when we had a hands-on practical. And, he had passed the written and everything, and I said, you're going to have to learn to take blood pressure. Oh, I know how to take blood. So he went to ACSM, he failed the ACSM exam for the same reason. Couldn't take blood pressure correctly.
You have to be humble.
It takes practice. And so often you will find physicians rarely do. They learn in school, but when you have your blood pressure taken, as that nurse or whoever is taking it, do they come over here and palpate for the brachial artery?
No.
Where do they put the stethoscope? They put it right there, don't they? That's not where your brachial artery is. That's a vein that you see there. Your brachial artery is over here on the medial side. That's where you put that stethoscope. And over again, you'll want doctors or nurses just flop it right there. And
Everybody, you can feel it. Just bend your elbow a little bit, and you can use your thumb. You also, there's a.
I got 5 minutes and I need to finish up
You
with
do.
blood pressure
I'll come
here
around and
get
feel
you
anybody's.
out of there.
Let me palpate.
What we do here is inside that cuff there is a bladder. And we palpate for the brachial artery. Then we make sure that the bladder, the middle of the bladder is right over that, so we basically get equal distribution around that. We inflate that cuff and we cut off the flow of blood. That's what you see happening here. Here's blood coming down the brachial artery. You inflate it to the point where you just temporarily interfere with the flow of blood. So if you happen to be taking a person's pulse here, you obliterate the pulse. You can't feel a pulse.
So basically, you're gonna fill the bladder until you stop hearing it.
What?
You need to stop hearing the pulse.
Well, yes. Well, what will happen is when you do start taking it up, you will start to hear. You don't hear it initially. Then you'll start to hear it. When you no longer hear it, you suspect that's going to be your systolic blood pressure. You take it up another 20 or 30 millimeters. You don't take it up to 200, 210, which they usually do in the doctor's office. And it hurts so much, what do you think happens to your blood pressure? Because it hurts. It goes up. So you just temporarily cut off the flow of blood. Okay, brachial artery closed, no blood flow. Then you start to release the pressure at a nice rate, about 2 to 4 millimeters a second. You're bringing that mercury down. When you get to the point that artery just opens up a little bit, now that blood has got to squeeze through that very narrow area. This creates a lot of turbulence. Because of that turbulence, you will start to hear the heart beating. And you notice, where is that mercury? Well, I might be dealing with one of these aneroid units that has that little needle on it. I notice, where is the mercury or where is that needle when I hear the first of 2 consecutive heartbeats? Then the heartbeat gets a little bit louder and louder. Then finally, when the artery returns to its normal configuration, there is no longer any turbulence. You no longer hear the heart beating. So you know, where is the mercury when I lose the sound of the heartbeat? So you have, where you hear the first 2 consecutive beats is going to be your systolic blood pressure. When you lose the sound of the heartbeat, that's your diastole. Now that's a very simplified version. Take a fitness testing course, we spend about 3 hours going over blood pressure, how to take it, and everything else. Then you will spend a lot of time in that course over and over again learning how to take blood pressure. Because it's extremely important. Extremely important. Okay? Very quickly, classification of blood pressure. We see what's typically called sort of the normal range. high normal you see here. Numbers you want to remember, 140.
See that in the middle of that chart, you guys highlight that, you're gonna have to know that for the test. Mild hypertension, highlight 140 and 90, excuse
If
me.
either my systolic is 140 or higher, and or my diastolic is 90 or higher, I suspect the person is hypertensive. I refer to a physician. The physician will then make a determination as to whether or not they are hypertensive and whether or not they're going to be put on medication. Usually, if it's not too high, they will try to get people to get it under control by losing some weight, getting involved with exercise. One of the things we emphasize, when you take a person's blood pressure as a fitness instructor, personal trainer, you do it as a suspectician, not a diagnostician. You are not doing a diagnosis. You suspect a person has high blood pressure. You refer to a physician. The physician then makes a determination as to whether they do have high blood pressure.
And you'll hear him say that again, we are suspecticians, not diagnosticians. Protect yourself.
Okay? We'll pick it up and we'll talk about how blood pressure changes with exercise. And we'll pick that up on Wednesday. Jane, we're over?
Yes, you guys, on Wednesday, we're back to a meeting room. Keep your book open there, just go ahead so that you can listen. At the bottom, you're gonna have to know this for the test, at the very bottom where it says exercise response, he's gonna explain all that, highlight it. You need to know that during rhythmic, aerobic, both the systolic goes up, but the diastolic stays the same, but resistive, they both go up. Just highlight that and he's gonna explain it
We'll go over that
Wednesday.
on.
But you are responsible for that. And you guys, it's so much fun in the advanced